The thin slip of
180
paper in
million.
my hand felt as heavy as an iron bar. Under the faint yellow light of my kitchen, the numbers were printed in bold, clear ink, unmistakable. 2, 17, 28, 41, 55, and the red Powerball number 9. They weren't special numbers to me, just a random sequence I'd scribbled down on a quiet Tuesday afternoon while waiting in line at the grocery store. But now they felt like a verdict. $80 million. I read the words beneath the numbers again and again. Jackpot winner. $80 million. The word million sounded foreign in this house where the familiar creak of the floorboards and the steady tick of the wall clock were the loudest sounds. This was the house that Vivian and I bought with every penny we had saved after 15 years of backbreaking work. Every scratch on the dining table, every faded spot on the wallpaper was a chapter in our story. A story of labor, of love, and of simple, quiet dinners. There was no room for millionaires here. I folded the ticket carefully as if it were a fragile relic. I didn't feel the explosion of joy you see on television. There was no shouting, no triumphant tears. Instead, a cold dread trickled down my spine. It was the feeling you get standing on top of a skyscraper, both mesmerized by the view and terrified of the fall. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. For 72 years, I'd lived a life defined by simple truths. You work hard, you pay your bills, you love your family, you put food on the table. The world made sense through that lens. But this $80 million truth made no sense at all. It was an earthquake rattling the very foundations of my world. I looked out the kitchen window at the lights of Atlanta twinkling in the distance. Out there in their sleek condos and sprawling suburban homes, my children were living their lives. Jamal with his expensive suits and a car that cost more than my first 2 houses combined. Angela with her picture-perfect life on social media and the mountain of debt she so carefully concealed. What would they do with this news? The question didn't bring me the warmth of sharing a blessing. It brought a quiet, gnawing fear. The ticket in my pocket felt like a burning coal. $80 million could buy mansions and sports cars and trips around the globe. But could it buy respect? Could it mend the fractures that had been silently spreading through my family for years? Or would it just be a sledgehammer smashing what little was left to pieces? I thought about the noise it would create, the phone calls, the financial advisors appearing out of nowhere, the distant relatives I hadn't heard from in decades. It would be a storm, and I was an old man who just wanted some peace. The clock on the wall kept ticking its steady, indifferent rhythm. It didn't know that in that single moment the world of a 72-year-old man had been altered forever. And I had the terrible feeling that the change wasn't entirely for the good. My first feeling was not that of a millionaire. It was that of an old soldier bracing himself for one final unexpected war. My eyes drifted across the living room. Every object was familiar down to the last detail. The armchair with the deep groove where I always sat, the one Vivian used to call my throne. The worn patch of carpet by the front door. Our wedding photograph on the mantelpiece, 2 young faces full of hope looking toward a future we thought we could control. But these things didn't bring me comfort anymore. They had become silent witnesses to the growing distance. The armchair opposite mine, the one Jamal's wife Tiffany called an eyesore, was where she had sat during their last visit on Thanksgiving. I can still see the way her eyes scanned the room, a calculating squint in her gaze. "Dad," she had said in that sickeningly sweet voice she used, "this place has great bones. I mean the potential. If you just cleared out all this old clutter and put a fresh coat of paint on the walls, the value would skyrocket." Jamal had nodded in agreement, his thumb scrolling endlessly on his phone. "Tiffany's right, Dad. This is a wasting asset. You should really think about downsizing to somewhere more manageable." They spoke of my home, the house Vivian had filled with love and laughter, as if it were an item on a balance sheet. They didn't see the memories. They only saw dollar signs. Their words didn't hurt because they were cruel. They hurt because they were empty. They saw a building, not a home. They saw an old man, not their father. The landline phone on the end table rang, startling me. I let it ring. It was probably another telemarketer, but its shrill sound reminded me of Angela. Her last call was 2 weeks ago. "Hi, Daddy, how are you?" she'd chirped. But I knew that question was just the opening act. After 3 minutes of superficial chatter, she launched into a story about a fantastic business opportunity she couldn't miss, a new organic makeup brand that needed an initial investor. She needed $5,000. When I gently told her my pension wouldn't allow for it, her voice turned instantly cold. "I just thought you'd want to help your daughter succeed," she'd said before ending the call with some vague excuse about being busy. To Jamal and Tiffany, I was a poor asset manager. To Angela, I was a failed investor. Did any of them still see me as a father? A heavy sorrow settled in my chest. "Vivian, what would you say if you were here? You would know what to do. You always knew." I walked over to the fireplace, my fingers gently tracing the edge of our wedding photo. Vivian was smiling, her eyes sparkling with a light that I hadn't seen in the world since she left. She was my compass, the one who always kept me pointed true north. She believed in hard work, honesty, and dignity. "Money is just a tool, Marcus," she used to say. "It can build or it can destroy. It all depends on the hands that hold it." Right now I was holding a tool with the destructive power of a bomb. I closed my eyes, trying to summon the sound of her voice. She would never let money destroy her family, but she would also never stand for disrespect and greed. She would want the truth. She would want to know what her children's hearts were really made of. And then suddenly an idea sparked in my mind. A dangerous, painful, but necessary idea. The lottery ticket in my pocket wasn't a burden or a blessing. It was a test. One final test. I would not tell a soul about this money. Instead, I would do the exact opposite. I would go to my children not as a millionaire, but as a desperate old man at the end of his rope. I would ask for their help. I would invent a crisis, a problem that only true love and loyalty could solve. This wasn't a game. It was surgery. A painful operation to cut away the tumors of deceit and see if the heart of my family was still healthy. I would finally know which of them remembered the lessons Vivian and I had taught them. I would know who was worthy of sharing our legacy. Opening my eyes, I looked at Vivian's smiling face in the photograph. I knew she would understand. She would nod even if it pained her. Because sometimes to save something, you have to be willing to risk losing it forever. That night, not as a millionaire, but as a father, I decided what I had to do. The test was set. It took me 3 attempts to pick up the phone. My hand felt heavy, a leaden weight at the end of my arm. The old black rotary phone sat on its little wooden table, a relic from another time just like me. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence of the house. This was foolish. A part of me screamed it. This was a cruel game to play with my own son. But a deeper, colder part of me knew it was necessary. I was a doctor about to press on a wound to see if there was still life underneath or only decay. I had written the script in my mind, rehearsed the tremor in my voice, the carefully placed pauses of a man struggling with shame. Now it was time to perform. I dialed the number from memory, a number I had called thousands of times before, to celebrate birthdays, to announce the birth of a grandchild, to share the news of Vivian's passing. Each ring felt like a lifetime. Then the click. Jamal's voice came through the line, clipped and distant. "Dad, everything okay? I'm in the middle of something." The words were not unkind, but they were the words of a busy man, not a concerned son. The test had already begun. I took a shaky breath, summoning the character I was about to play. Jamal's son. "I'm sorry to bother you at work. I know you're busy." I let my voice crack just a little. "But something's happened. Something serious." I could hear the faint sound of typing in the background. It stopped. "What is it, Dad? Are you hurt?" The question was a formality, a box to be checked. No, I'm not hurt physically. It's the house, son. It's the house." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "I got a letter from the county. They've reassessed the property taxes. With all the new construction in the neighborhood, the value has shot up. They say I owe them more money. A lot more." The lie felt slick and ugly in my mouth, but I pushed on my voice, dropping to a near whisper. "I don't have it, Jamal. I got a final notice in the mail today, all printed in red. It says if I don't pay, they'll put a lien on the house. I think it means they can take it." The silence on the other end was different now. It wasn't just the absence of typing. It was a heavy, analytical silence. "How much, Dad? How much is it?" The question came out flat, devoid of emotion. $15,000. I said the number, feeling like a criminal. "I have to pay it in 2 weeks. I'm so sorry to ask, son. I'm so ashamed. I don't know who else to turn to. I never thought I'd be in this position." The words tumbled out just as I had practiced them, a cascade of pathetic old man fear. The sigh from Jamal was audible, a long, suffering exhalation of breath. Dad, we've talked about this. I've told you a dozen times you need to have a better handle on your finances. Property taxes are not a surprise. They come every year. Did you not budget for this? What happened to the money I sent you for your birthday? I pictured him in his glass-walled office, leaning back in his leather chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. He wasn't talking to his father. He was talking to a failing investment. I didn't understand the letter they sent before. I stammered, playing my part. The print was so small, Marcus. I thought it was just a routine notice. I didn't realize. Another sigh from Jamal, louder this time. You didn't realize. Dad, you're living in a $500,000 asset, but you're living like you're broke because you have no liquidity. Your entire net worth is tied up in a building that costs you money every month. This is a classic cash flow problem. The jargon was designed to confuse me, to put me in my place, to establish him as the expert and me as the fool. It worked. I felt a flush of real shame, even though I knew it was all a lie. He continued, his voice gaining the smooth, condescending rhythm of a lecture. We need to think strategically here. Panicking is the worst thing you can do. $15,000 is a significant sum. You can't just pull that out of thin air. Have you considered your options? Maybe a reverse mortgage. My blood ran cold. A reverse mortgage. He was suggesting I sign away the equity of my home, a home Vivian and I had worked our entire lives to own outright, for a short-term problem he believed was real. He wasn't offering to help. He was offering to help me get into debt. I don't know anything about those things, Jamal. I mumbled. It sounds complicated. Of course it sounds complicated, he said, a sharp edge of impatience in his voice. That's why you have me. But honestly, Dad, the real solution here is obvious. It's what Tiffany and I have been saying for years. You need to sell the house. It's too much for you to manage anyway. You can take the equity cash out, put it in a managed fund that generates income, and move into a nice retirement community. No property taxes, no leaking roofs, no worries. It's the logical move. There it was, the true answer. The solution to my fabricated problem was the fulfillment of his long-held wish. Get the old man out, sell the house, cash in the asset. My heart, which had been pounding with the anxiety of the performance, now felt like a block of ice in my chest. He didn't hear a father in trouble. He heard an opportunity knocking. Every word he spoke was a nail in the coffin of the man I thought my son was. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike on the sidewalk right outside this house. I remembered holding him in my arms in the living room when he had a nightmare. Where did that little boy go? When did he get replaced by this cold, calculating stranger? I stayed silent, letting him fill the void. Look, Dad, I know it's a lot to take in. Here's what we'll do. Don't do anything. Don't call the county. Don't talk to anyone. Let me discuss this with Tiffany tonight. She's much better at this sort of strategic planning than I am. We'll come up with a comprehensive plan for you. We can come over this weekend and lay out the options. But you need to be prepared to make some tough but necessary decisions. We're thinking about your future, your security. He was framing his greed as concern. He was packaging my eviction as a favor. The performance was breathtaking in its audacity. The part of me that was a father wanted to scream, to curse him, to demand he remember who he was talking to. But the actor in me held fast. I sniffled into the receiver. Okay, son, whatever you think is best, I trust you. The lie almost choked me. Good. That's the right attitude, Dad. Be proactive. Okay, I have to run. A conference call I can't miss. Just sit tight and we'll handle it. We'll talk this weekend. The line clicked dead. He was gone. I sat there holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone's empty hum. The phone felt impossibly heavy now. I placed it back on its cradle, my hand shaking not with fake fear, but with a very real and profound sorrow. The performance was over. The house was silent once more. But this silence was different. It was the silence of a final judgment. The first test was complete and the results were in. My son had seen my desperation not as a call for help, but as a business opportunity. The coldness I felt had nothing to do with the winter air outside. It was the chilling dawn of a terrible new clarity. The dial tone buzzed in my ear for a full minute before I had the strength to put the receiver back in its cradle. The plastic felt cold against my skin, a dead thing. I sat there in the silence, which was now heavier, more suffocating than before. My own son had just calmly and logically planned my eviction from my own life. He had spoken of my home, my past, my very existence as a series of inconvenient assets to be liquidated. He had offered me a future in a sterile room in a facility where strangers would manage my final days, all for the sake of a better return on his investment. He called it a comprehensive plan. I called it an execution. My mind replayed his words, his tone a cold, sterile loop of audio. You have no liquidity. A classic cash flow problem. The logical move. He spoke a language I didn't understand, but I understood the meaning perfectly. I was a problem to be solved, a messy equation to be simplified. He hadn't asked if I was scared. He hadn't asked if I needed anything. He hadn't offered a word of comfort. He had offered strategy. He had offered a business solution to a crisis of the heart. The boy who once scraped his knee and came crying to me for a bandage was now offering to amputate a limb to cure a scratch. I looked at the worn armchair where he used to sit as a child, his small legs dangling far from the floor as I read him stories. We read about heroes and dragons, about honor and courage. Vivian and I had raised him on those stories. We taught him that a man's worth wasn't in his bank account, but in his character. We taught him that family was a fortress, a safe harbor in the storms of life, not a corporation where you cut loose the underperforming divisions. Where had we gone wrong? Or had we not gone wrong at all? Was this who he truly was all along, a wolf we had mistaken for a sheep? Tiffany. Let me discuss this with Tiffany. The words echoed in my head. I knew my son. He was weak-willed, easily swayed by the prospect of status and wealth. But Tiffany, she was different. She was the architect of this cold new world. She saw our family history not as a tapestry of love and sacrifice, but as old furniture to be thrown out to make room for her sleek, modern ambitions. She was the one who had planted these ideas in his head, nurtured them, watered them with her constant talk of property values and investment portfolios. She had helped him transform his father from a person into a price tag, and my son had let her do it. He had let her poison the well from which he drank because he liked the taste of the water. The shame he had accused me of feeling now felt real, but it was not for my supposed financial failures. It was a father's shame. A shame for having raised a son who could look at his own father's desperation and see only an opportunity to increase his net worth. His promise to handle it was not a comfort, it was a threat. It meant they would descend upon me this weekend with charts and brochures and a pen for me to sign my life away. They would be gentle. They would be persuasive. They would smile as they showed me pictures of the clean, quiet room where I would go to die while they counted the money from the sale of my soul. I thought of Vivian. I thought of the day we paid off the mortgage. She had cried tears of pure joy. She had danced with me in this very living room. "We own it, Marcus," she'd whispered, her head on my chest. "It's ours. No one can ever take it from us." My son now stood ready to do what no bank or creditor ever could. He was ready to take it all away. A cold anger began to smolder beneath the ice of my sorrow. It was a quiet, righteous anger. This test was no longer just a test. It was a battle for my dignity, for my home, for the memory of the woman I loved. Jamal and Tiffany thought they were dealing with a confused old man. They thought they held all the cards. They had no idea that I was holding a winning ticket worth more than they could ever dream of, and I would not let them win. I would not let their greed tarnish everything Vivian and I had built. The pain in my heart began to solidify into something else. Resolve. The first part of the test was over. The diagnosis was grim. Now it was time for the next step. I had to call my daughter. My hand trembled as I reached for the phone again. The call with Jamal had left me feeling hollowed out, as if I had been in a collision. Now I had to do it all over again. Calling Jamal had been like facing a surgeon's scalpel, cold and precise. Calling Angela that felt like stepping into the path of a hurricane, a chaotic whirlwind of emotion and drama that always left me feeling drained and disoriented. I stood up from the armchair, my joints protesting, and walked into the kitchen. The simple act of filling the kettle and placing it on the stove was a small anchor in the storm that was raging inside me. I needed a moment to ground myself, to switch from one performance to another. For Jamal, I had to be a confused, incompetent old man. For Angela, I had to be a heartbroken father, a victim she could pour her theatrical sympathy onto. As I waited for the water to boil, my eyes fell on a small framed photograph on the refrigerator, held in place by a tacky flower-shaped magnet. It was Angela when she was 6 years old, a gap-toothed smile on her face, a bright yellow ribbon in her hair. She was holding up a drawing, a messy crayon portrait of our family. I remembered that day. She had been so proud. She had thrown her little arms around my neck and said, "I love you, Daddy." A wave of genuine love and sorrow washed over me. I loved that little girl with all my heart, and I mourned for her because somewhere along the way she had gotten lost, replaced by the self-absorbed stranger I was about to call. The kettle whistled, screaming into the quiet kitchen. I poured the boiling water over a tea bag, my hands steadier now. The pain of the memory had given me what I needed, a sense of purpose. I was doing this for that little girl too, to see if any trace of her still existed inside the woman my daughter had become. I took the warm mug back to the living room, sat down and dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice a breathless rush of energy. "Daddy, hi. What's up?" I could hear music and chatter in the background. She was probably at some trendy cafe documenting her afternoon for her online followers. "Angie, sweetheart." I began, my voice laced with a carefully constructed weariness. "I need to talk to you. Is this a bad time?" "Oh no, of course not. What is it? You sound strange. Is everything okay?" I launched into the story again, this time painting it with the colors of emotion and memory. I told her about the tax bill, the threatening letter, the looming deadline. I didn't use words like liquidity or asset. I used words like home and memories. "They could take the house, Angie," I said, my voice cracking just so. "The home you grew up in, the place where we put up the Christmas tree every year, the kitchen where your mother taught you how to bake cookies. I might lose everything." The reaction was immediate, a loud, dramatic gasp that sounded perfectly rehearsed. "Oh my God, Daddy. Oh my God, no. That's horrible. That's a nightmare. I can't believe this is happening to you." Her voice climbed in pitch, a symphony of performative distress. I could almost see her, her free hand flying to her chest, her eyes wide with fake horror. She sniffled loudly into the phone. "This is so unfair. After everything you've done, after how hard you've worked, how could they do this to you? My heart is just breaking for you, Daddy. It's literally breaking." For a brief, foolish moment, a tiny part of me, a father's stubborn heart, wanted to believe her. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was real. Maybe beneath all the layers of performance there was a daughter who truly cared. That glimmer of hope lasted for approximately 10 seconds, because then came the pivot, the seamless transition from my tragedy to hers. "I wish I could help, Daddy. I really, really do," she said, her voice thick with bogus tears. "You know I would give you anything if I could, but I'm in such a terrible spot myself right now. It's just like the universe is conspiring against me or something." The spotlight had swiveled. The stage was now hers. My crisis about losing my home was now merely the opening act for the grand opera of her life. "My landlord is being a total monster," she continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He's threatening to raise the rent again, and you know I can barely afford it as it is. And that big influencer collaboration I told you about, the skincare brand, the one that was going to solve everything, it fell through at the last minute. They said they wanted to go in a younger direction. Can you believe that? Ageism is so real, Daddy. It's a struggle out here." I listened in silence, taking a slow sip of my tea. The torrent of her woes was a familiar sound, a tangled web of unpaid bills, broken promises, and a baffling inability to take responsibility for any of her own choices. She complained about the cost of the organic meal delivery service she used because she was too stressed to cook. She complained about a friend who had borrowed a designer handbag and returned it with a small scuff mark. She complained about the crushing pressure to create content for her followers who just didn't understand how much emotional labor it involved. My $15,000 crisis, a problem that threatened to strip me of my home and my security, was now completely forgotten. It had served its purpose. It had given her an opening to talk about the only subject that truly interested her, herself. I felt a profound weariness settle into my bones, a sadness that was different from the sharp betrayal Jamal had inflicted. This was the dull ache of a chronic wound, a long-standing disappointment that had become a part of my life. My daughter wasn't a cruel person, not in the way her brother was. She was simply a child. A 40-year-old child trapped in the amber of her own reflection, unable to see anyone's pain but her own. Finally, after a long monologue detailing every injustice she had recently suffered, she wound down, ending with a deep, self-pitying sigh. "So you see, Daddy, I'm basically broke. I have like $200 in my bank account until my next sponsored post clears. I feel so powerless. I hate that I can't just write you a check. It's killing me, it really is." Then came the part I had been waiting for, the move that was as predictable as the sun rising in the east. She lowered her voice into a conspiratorial whisper as if she were sharing a brilliant secret that had just occurred to her. "You know, Daddy, if I wasn't in this temporary hole, I could solve all your problems. I really could. I have so many things in the pipeline. If I could just get a little bit of capital to get me over this hump, just a small loan to tide me over, maybe just a couple thousand, I could pay my rent so I don't get evicted, and I could get my car fixed so I can get to auditions. Then I could land one of my big campaigns, and I swear, as soon as the money comes in, the very first thing I'll do is write you a check for that entire tax bill. I promise. It would be like an investment in our family's future, really. A way for me to help you." There it was. The reverse ask. The breathtaking selfishness of it was almost a work of art. My house was on the line, my world was crumbling, and her response was to see it as an opportunity. She had heard my story of drowning, and instead of throwing me a rope, she asked if I could lend her my wallet while I was going under. The absurdity of it was so profound it left me feeling numb. The anger and sorrow I had felt earlier were gone, replaced by a calm, empty resignation. This was my daughter. This was who she was. The test hadn't revealed a hidden monster. It had simply held up a mirror to what I already knew but had spent years trying to deny. My son was a shark circling a potential meal. My daughter was a black hole absorbing all light and giving nothing back. "No, Angela," I said, my voice quiet and flat. "I don't have any money to give you. I'm sorry to hear about your troubles." The silence on her end was a sudden drop in temperature. All the fake sympathy, all the theatrical warmth vanished in an instant. It was replaced by a sullen pout I could feel through the phone line. "Oh," she said, her voice clipped and cold. "Okay, fine. I was just trying to help find a solution for both of us." "I have to go," she said quickly. "I have a yoga class I can't be late for. Let me know what happens with the house, I guess." The line went dead. She hadn't offered a single piece of advice. She hadn't offered to come over and talk. She hadn't offered even a moment of genuine human connection. Her empathy had a price tag, and when I couldn't pay, she simply walked away. I placed the phone down for the second time that day. The two main pillars of my life, my two children, had crumbled to dust in the span of a single hour. One had offered to sell my past to fund his future. The other had tried to leverage my crisis to fund her present. I felt a strange and terrible freedom. The hope that had been a source of so much pain was finally extinguished. I knew the truth now. I knew exactly where I stood. I was utterly and completely alone. And in that moment, alone with my $80 million secret, I had never felt more clear about what I had to do next. The performance was over. It was time to start planning the final act. I sat in the deepening twilight of the living room for a long time after the call with Angela. The house was a vessel of silence, and I was its solitary passenger adrift on a dark and quiet sea. The raw pain of the betrayals had subsided, leaving behind a strange and unwelcome clarity. It was like seeing my family through a new pair of glasses. The blurry outlines of love and obligation I had clung to for years had sharpened into stark, undeniable shapes. My son, the pragmatist, saw me as a line item on a spreadsheet. My daughter, the performer, saw me as an audience member who had failed to pay for his ticket. The truth was ugly, but it was also clean. There were no more illusions to hide behind. The phone rang again, its shrill cry tearing through the fragile peace. My body tensed. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones who it was. Jamal had said he would talk to Tiffany. This was not a random call. This was a calculated follow-up. This was the second wave of the assault, the one that came with a smile instead of a sword. I let it ring 3 times, composing myself, slipping back into the role of the weary old man, and then I picked up the receiver. "Hello." "Dad, it's Tiffany." Her voice was a river of warm honey flowing smoothly through the phone line designed to soothe and disarm. "Oh, I'm so glad I reached you. Jamal just told me what's going on, and I have been worried sick ever since. Are you all right?" The performance was masterful. Every syllable was perfectly weighted with concern. If I didn't know better, I would have believed her. I would have felt a surge of gratitude for this caring daughter-in-law who was stepping in where my own children had failed. But I did know better now. I could see the cold machinery working just beneath the warm surface. "I'm hanging in there, Tiffany," I said, my voice quiet and tired. "Thank you for calling. It's been a difficult day." Oh, I can only imagine, she purred. Of course it's difficult. It's a terrible shock and you shouldn't have to go through this all by yourself. I was so upset when I heard. Jamal can be a bit blunt, you know how he is. She laughed, a light tinkling sound. He thinks in numbers and spreadsheets. He doesn't always realize there's an emotional side to things, but that's why he has me. In one smooth move, she had allied herself with me, created a shared gentle criticism of her own husband, and positioned herself as the emotionally intelligent savior. She was good. She was very, very good. We're just so worried about you being in that big house all by yourself with these kinds of burdens. She continued, her voice soft as velvet. A man your age should be relaxing, enjoying your retirement, not stressing over confusing property tax notices and worrying about household repairs. It's just too much for one person to handle. Vivian would have wanted you to be at peace, not struggling with all this. The mention of my wife's name was a deliberate, calculated strike designed to lower my defenses, to make me feel that she understood the true depth of my life. But all it did was make my blood run cold. Vivian had seen through Tiffany from the very beginning. She's polished Marcus. I remember Vivian telling me once after a family dinner, almost too polished. Be careful what's underneath all that shine. At the time, I had dismissed it as a mother's natural suspicion. Now I saw it as a prophecy. Tiffany pressed on, sensing she had an opening. Jamal and I were talking, and we just want to help you explore all the options so you can make the best decision for you. We were thinking, what if we could turn this stressful asset, the house, into something that works for you, something that provides you with a steady income and total peace of mind, so you never have to worry about a sudden bill like this ever again. Her language was flawless. She didn't say, sell the house. She said, turn a stressful asset into something that works for you. She didn't talk about what they wanted. She talked about my peace of mind. She was selling me a cage and calling it a sanctuary. My mind was a block of ice. I saw her strategy with perfect clarity. Jamal had been the battering ram, the brute force designed to shock me and break down my initial resistance. Now she was the diplomat sent in to manage the fallout and guide the dazed survivor toward the predetermined conclusion. They were a perfect team, a predator with two heads. Look, this is all far too much to discuss properly over the phone, she said, her voice shifting into a practical, helpful tone. It's all just numbers and hypotheticals right now. Why don't we come over this weekend? Jamal and I can drive down on Saturday morning. We can all sit down together in the living room, have a nice cup of coffee, and just talk. We can lay everything out on the table. No pressure at all, just a family conversation to figure out the best way to help you through this. A family conversation. The lie was so beautiful, so elegant, it was almost admirable. This wasn't going to be a family conversation. It was going to be a corporate presentation, a closing argument. They would come armed with folders and figures, with gentle smiles and a pen for me to sign my future away. The final part of her strategy clicked into place. And please, Dad, she added, her voice dropping into a confidential whisper, don't you worry your head about a single thing until then. Don't call the county. Don't talk to a lawyer. It will only confuse things and add to your stress. Let us handle the pressure for now. That's what family is for, right? To carry the burden for each other. This was it, the final move. Isolate the target. Ensure he doesn't seek outside counsel. Keep him confused and scared until they can swoop in and save him. I felt a strange sense of calm. The test was yielding results more definitive than I could have ever imagined. I knew my role now. I was the lamb, and I had to play my part until the very end. That sounds very kind of you, Tiffany, I said, my voice thick with a gratitude I did not feel. Yes, this weekend would be good. I'd appreciate the help. Wonderful, she chirped, the relief and triumph in her voice barely concealed. It's all going to be okay, Dad. You'll see. We'll be there around 10 on Saturday. You just rest until then. We love you. I love you too, I said. The line went dead. I held the receiver for a moment before placing it back down. The house was silent again, but the silence had changed once more. It was no longer the silence of loneliness or sorrow. It was the silence of a chessboard after a devastating move has been made. The silence of a battlefield just before the dawn. Jamal was the scout who had identified the target. Tiffany was the strategist drawing up the plan of attack. And this weekend, they would launch their invasion. They thought they were coming to conquer a tired, defeated old man. They had no idea they were walking into a trap of their own making. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer just a father testing his children. I was a general preparing his defenses, and I would not lose this war. The days between the phone calls and the promised weekend visit were the longest of my life. The silence in the house was a living thing, a predator that stalked me from room to room. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the clock was a countdown to a confrontation I both dreaded and desperately needed. I spent those days cleaning. I scrubbed the floors until the old wood gleamed. I polished every piece of furniture. I washed the windows until the sunlight streamed in unobstructed. It wasn't for them. It was for me. It was for Vivian. It was an act of defiance, a quiet declaration that this was not a wasting asset or a fixer-upper. This was a home, a loved home. On Saturday afternoon, I saw their car pull up to the curb. A sleek black German sedan that looked like a spaceship had landed in my quiet working-class neighborhood. It gleamed with an arrogant shine that seemed to mock the modest, well-kept houses around it. Jamal and Tiffany emerged, dressed in expensive casual wear that probably cost more than my monthly pension. They looked like they were on their way to a wine tasting at a country club, not to visit a father who was supposedly on the brink of losing his home. But it was the third person who made my heart freeze. A man I didn't know stepped out of the back seat. He wore a crisp blue blazer and carried a leather portfolio. He had the polished, impersonal look of someone who dealt in contracts and bottom lines. My blood ran cold. They hadn't come for a family conversation. They had brought a soldier for their invasion. I opened the door before they had a chance to ring the bell. I had to maintain the illusion that I was just a simple old man eager for their help. "Jamal, Tiffany, you're here." "Dad." Tiffany swept past me into the house, bringing a cloud of expensive perfume with her. She gave me a brittle air kiss, her cheek cold against mine. "You're looking well, a little tired maybe, but we're here to help you with all that." Her eyes were already scanning the room, taking in the clean surfaces, the polished wood. But she wasn't seeing the care I had taken. She was assessing the inventory. Jamal followed, giving me a brisk pat on the shoulder that felt more like a summons than a hug. "Dad, this is Mr. Henderson. He's a real estate consultant. I asked him to come along to give us a professional opinion on the situation, just so we have all the facts." He said it so casually, as if bringing a stranger to appraise a man's home without his permission was the most normal thing in the world. Mr. Henderson offered me a firm, dry handshake and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Thorne, a pleasure. You have a lovely place here. Very solid structure." His voice was smooth and professional, but his eyes were already at work measuring angles, noting the flow of light, calculating square footage. He wasn't seeing a home. He was seeing a property. I felt a surge of hot anger, but I swallowed it down, forcing a weak smile. "A consultant, I see. You've been busy." "We just want to be thorough, Dad," Jamal said, leading the way into the living room as if he were the host. "No point in making emotional decisions. We need data." What followed was one of the most humiliating hours of my life. It was a violation, a slow, methodical dissection of my entire life's history. Tiffany led the tour, her voice a bright, cheerful counterpoint to the grim business at hand. She and Mr. Henderson moved from room to room, speaking in a low-coded language. "Good natural light here," Mr. Henderson would murmur, tapping a wall. "Could easily open this up to the kitchen to create a modern great room concept." "Oh, absolutely," Tiffany would agree, her voice full of fake enthusiasm. "And the floors are original hardwood. They'd look stunning once they're refinished. We'd have to get rid of that old carpeting, of course." Che. The old carpeting was a rug Vivian had picked out after saving for months. She had loved its deep blue color. They moved into my bedroom, my private space. Mr. Henderson made a note on his tablet. "Decent-sized master, but the closet space is a bit dated. A walk-in closet would be a major selling point." Tiffany pointed to the old dresser that had belonged to my mother. "And all this heavy, dark furniture would have to go. It makes the room feel so much smaller than it is." I stood in the doorway watching them. I felt like a ghost in my own home. They spoke about my life's possessions, my memories as if they were obstacles to be removed, inconveniences on the path to profit. Every comment was a small cut, a tiny stab of disrespect. They weren't just appraising a house. They were erasing me from it. They were writing a new story for these walls, a story in which I had no part. Jamal's job was to manage me. He stayed by my side in the living room, attempting to make small talk, trying to keep me distracted from the quiet dismantling of my life that was happening in the other rooms. He asked about my health, about the neighbors, about the weather. His questions were empty, hollow things designed to fill the silence. He was so transparently nervous, so clearly uncomfortable with the cold-blooded nature of their plan that it was almost pathetic. He was a coward hiding behind his wife's ambition and a stranger's expertise. After what felt like an eternity, Tiffany and Mr. Henderson returned to the living room, their faces glowing with a quiet satisfaction. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Well, Mr. Thorne, you have a very desirable property here. The location is excellent in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The bones of the house are good. Of course, it would require significant investment to modernize it for today's market. A new kitchen, new bathrooms, updating the electrical. But the potential is undeniable." Tiffany sat down on the armchair opposite me, leaning forward with a look of deep, earnest concern on her face. "That's wonderful news, isn't it, Dad? It means you're sitting on a real nest egg, much more than you probably realized." She placed a folder on the coffee table between us. I knew without looking that it contained charts and comparisons and numbers all designed to prove their point. "Mr. Henderson ran some preliminary numbers for us," she said, her voice dropping. "And honestly, Dad, it's even better than we hoped. This house, this asset, it's the solution to all your problems. Not just this tax bill, but for the rest of your life." Jamal chimed in, his voice full of a false confidence. "He's right, Dad. This is our way forward. This is how we secure your future." I looked at their faces, my son and his wife. They were flushed with victory. They thought they had won. They thought the data and the expert and the carefully worded arguments had cornered me. They saw my silence as acceptance, my tired expression as defeat. They had appraised my house, but they had completely misjudged the man who lived inside it. The visit was over, the inspection was complete, the vultures had gathered, and now they were ready to feast. The front door clicked shut behind them, leaving a void of silence that was somehow louder and more menacing than their voices had been. I was alone again, but the house no longer felt like my own. It felt like a crime scene, a place that had been violated and documented by strangers. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the walls, my feet treading on the floors that had just been judged and found wanting. I was a ghost in the museum of my own life, a life they had just declared was ready to be packed up and put into storage. I sat down in my armchair, the one they had mentally discarded, and I waited. I knew they would be back. I knew The appraiser was just the opening salvo. The main attack was yet to come. An hour later, they returned alone. Their faces were flush with a strange mixture of excitement and feigned solemnity, like heirs at a funeral who have just been told the will is in their favor. Tiffany was carrying a sleek leather folder. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture radiating a tense energy. Jamal took the armchair opposite me, leaning forward and placing his hands on his knees, a parody of a caring doctor about to deliver a serious diagnosis. "Dad," Jamal began, his voice a low, serious murmur. "First of all, thank you for letting us do that. I know it was a little unusual, but it was a necessary first step. And the news is very good. Mr. Henderson's preliminary assessment is that this house is worth significantly more than we initially thought, even in its current condition." Tiffany opened her folder. "The market in this neighborhood is on fire, Dad. You're sitting on a gold mine, a real nest egg. This isn't a crisis. It's an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity to secure your future." She slid a piece of paper across the coffee table towards me. It was covered in numbers, columns, and percentages, a spreadsheet that purported to represent the sum total of my life's work. "Let me walk you through this," Jamal said, pointing to the top line. "This is the conservative estimated sale price. After the standard commissions and closing costs here, you're left with this amount. It's a substantial sum, Dad. A very substantial sum." He spoke the words with reverence, as if the numbers themselves were a holy scripture. "Now we've projected a modest return if we invest this capital in a diversified portfolio of low-risk bonds and blue-chip stocks. It would generate a steady, dependable income for you every month, more than enough to live on comfortably. In fact, you'd be making money, not just scraping by on your pension." I stared at the numbers. They were just abstract symbols on a page. I tried to see what they saw. I tried to see a nest egg, a portfolio, an opportunity, but all I could see were the things they couldn't quantify. I saw the 56 Christmases Vivian and I had spent in this house. I saw the pencil marks on the doorframe in the kitchen tracking our children's growth year by year. I saw the ghost of my wife's laughter in the garden where she grew her roses. How do you put a price on a ghost's laugh? What is the market value of a child's height measured in pencil marks? The numbers on the page were a foreign language describing a world I didn't know and didn't want to know. Jamal was still talking, his voice a confident drone. The beauty of this plan, Dad, is that it solves everything. It eliminates the tax burden. It removes the stress of home maintenance. It converts a non-performing asset into a liquid income-generating resource. It is without a doubt the most logical and financially prudent path forward. He finished his presentation and looked at me expectantly, a proud student waiting for his teacher's praise. He had laid out his case with what he thought was flawless logic. He had shown me the numbers. He had proven his point. He truly believed he was helping. He truly believed that this cold, brutal transaction was an act of love, and that was the most heartbreaking part of all. He was so lost in his world of numbers that he had forgotten how to be a son. Tiffany, seeing my silence, must have mistaken it for confusion or indecision. She decided it was time for the final part of their presentation, the emotional closing argument. She reached into her large designer handbag and pulled out another folder. This one wasn't filled with spreadsheets. It was filled with glossy, colorful brochures. She fanned them out on the coffee table like a deck of cards. The pictures showed smiling, silver-haired seniors engaged in various pleasant activities. Painting watercolors, playing bridge, doing gentle yoga on a pristine lawn. The headlines were written in a cheerful, flowing script. Golden Meadows Retirement Living. Serenity Gardens Assisted Care. The pinnacle of senior lifestyles. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the brochures, the smiling faces, the perfect lawns. It was a vision of a clean, sterile, respectable end of life. A place where old people were kept safe and quiet and out of the way. A place where memories were not welcome because they cluttered up the pristine modern rooms. "This is the best part, Dad," Tiffany said, her voice soft and persuasive. "This is what all that money can buy you. Freedom. Freedom from worry. Freedom from loneliness. A community of people your own age. We've done the research. These are the best facilities in the state. They have gourmet dining rooms, movie theaters, and 24-hour medical staff on call. You wouldn't have to lift a finger for the rest of your life. You'd be safe. You'd be cared for. And we'd have peace of mind knowing you were." Each word was a hammer blow. Each smiling picture was an insult. They had not just planned the sale of my house. They had planned the disposition of my body. They had chosen the clean, quiet box they intended to put me in. Jamal leaned forward, picking up the brochure for a place called Serenity Gardens. "This one is our top choice, Dad. It's close to us so we can visit all the time. The facilities are incredible. We've already spoken to the director. They have a private room with a garden view that would be perfect for you. In fact..." He paused, taking a deep breath as if preparing to announce a wonderful surprise. "We were so sure you'd see how perfect this solution is that we went ahead and put a small deposit down to hold the room for you. It's fully refundable, of course, but we didn't want you to lose the opportunity." That was it. That was the moment. The sound in the room seemed to fade away. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the sound of my own breathing all vanished. There was only a profound ringing silence in my ears. A deposit. They had put a deposit down. They had stood in my home, a home filled with the presence of their mother, and had presented me with a plan to sell it out from under me. And then they had revealed that they had already taken the liberty of booking my room in the institution where I would be sent after the sale was complete. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a plan. It was a verdict. They had judged my life and found it to be a burden. They had sentenced me to a comfortable exile, and they were proud of themselves for having arranged it so efficiently. The pain I had felt earlier, the sorrow, the disappointment, it all vanished in that instant. It was consumed by a flash of white-hot rage so pure and so intense it burned away everything else. And when the fire passed, it left behind something new. Something cold and hard and clear as ice. I looked at them, at my son and my daughter-in-law. I saw their eager, expectant faces, their confident smiles. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see family. I saw strangers. I saw antagonists. I slowly reached out and picked up the glossy brochure for Serenity Gardens. I looked at the picture of a smiling, white-haired man playing chess with a nurse. I looked at the list of amenities. I looked at the floor plan of the small quiet room they had reserved for me. I raised my eyes and looked at Jamal. I saw the little boy I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the teenager I had taught to drive a car. I saw the man he had become. And I felt nothing. The love had been burned away. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "You've given me a lot to think about." They beamed, their faces alight with triumph. They had won. The old man had seen the logic. "Of course, Dad," Jamal said, standing up. "We knew you would. We'll leave all this with you. We'll call you in a couple of days to see if you have any questions." They walked to the door, convinced of their victory, convinced of their own righteousness. After they were gone, I remained in my chair for a long time. The house was quiet again. I looked down at the brochure in my hands. Serenity Gardens. A peaceful end. They had planned it all so perfectly. I thought of Vivian. I thought of the life we had built in this house, the love we had shared. I thought of the legacy of greed and disrespect my children were so eager to claim. The test was over. The results were undeniable. And now the war had begun. Slowly, deliberately, I took the glossy brochure in my hands and tore it in half. Then I tore the halves into quarters. I didn't stop until all that was left was a pile of colorful confetti in my lap. After the storm of Jamal and Tiffany's visit, a strange and unsettling calm settled over the house. I felt like a man who had survived a shipwreck, now sitting on a desolate shore surveying the wreckage. The brochures for my future life in a pastel-colored room sat in a torn pile in the bottom of the trash can. I knew their next move was coming. A phone call, another visit, the gentle pressure of the paperwork they wanted me to sign. For 2 days, however, there was nothing. Just the ticking clock and my own thoughts, which were now cold and clear and sharp as glass. I was no longer a father grieving his children. I was a general studying the enemy. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning, not through a dramatic confrontation, but through a small, almost comical act of carelessness. I was in the garage looking for my old wood carving tools. It was a hobby I had picked up after Vivian passed away to keep my hands and mind busy. The small wooden box where I kept the chisels and knives wasn't in its usual spot on the workbench. I searched the shelves, a knot of irritation tightening in my stomach. I was a creature of habit. I always put them back. That's when my neighbor, a kind young woman named Maria, knocked on the open garage door. She was holding her phone. "Mr. Thorne, sorry to bother you," she said with a bright smile. "This is going to sound random, but I didn't know you were selling your carving tools. I saw them on Marketplace, and my husband is looking for a set just like that. Is this your listing?" I felt a jolt of confusion. "My listing? I don't know what you mean, Maria. I'm not selling anything." She looked puzzled and held out her phone. "Oh, that's weird. Look." I took the phone from her hand. And there they were. My tools. Laid out on the familiar oil-stained surface of my workbench. The picture was taken from an angle I knew well, standing right where I was now. And below the picture was the seller's name, Angela Thorne. The description read, "Vintage wood carving set for sale. Super cool and rustic. My dad is downsizing and doesn't need these old things anymore. Great for decoration. Message me for price. Doesn't need these old things anymore." The words echoed in my head. She had walked into my home, into my private space, taken my property and put it up for sale with the casual indifference of someone cleaning out a dead man's attic. She had declared my hobby, my passion, my small connection to peace to be obsolete. To her, they were just old things to be sold for a quick buck, probably to fund her next brunch or a new pair of shoes. I handed the phone back to Maria, my face a calm, unreadable mask. "Ah, yes," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "My daughter is helping me declutter. Thank you for letting me know." After she left, I stood alone in the garage for a long time. It wasn't about the tools. It wasn't about the money. It was about the breathtaking disrespect. Jamal and Tiffany were planning a grand heist, the theft of my entire future. Angela, in her own thoughtless way, was busy pilfering the pockets of the past. They were a pack of scavengers, each with their own style, but all unified by the same chilling belief that my life and everything in it was now theirs for the taking. This small, cheap act of betrayal was somehow more clarifying than all of their grand plans. It was the final piece of evidence. The last nail in the coffin of the man I used to be, the loving father who made excuses for his children. That man was gone now, and the man who stood in his place was ready for war. The days that followed were a quiet torment. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison cell, where I was the sole inmate awaiting a sentence I already knew had been decided. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, each object a testament to a life my children were eager to erase. The silence was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall, a relentless countdown to my own dispossession. My anger had cooled, leaving behind the cold, heavy ash of sorrow. I found myself looking at old photographs, searching the smiling faces of my children as little kids for some clue, some hint of the callous strangers they would become. I saw Jamal, age 7, proudly holding up a finger, painting his eyes wide with a need for my approval. I saw Angela, age 4, asleep in my arms, her small hand clutching my shirt. Where did that love go? How does a heart that was once so full of affection become so empty? The lottery ticket hidden away in my old safe felt like a cruel joke. I had $80 million, enough to buy and sell my children's ambitions 100 times over, yet I had never felt more impoverished. I was a king with a hollow crown ruling over a kingdom of ghosts and memories. On the third night, as I sat in the darkness of the living room, a soft knock came at the front door. It was tentative, almost shy. My first thought was that Jamal and Tiffany had returned to press their advantage, but their knock would have been confident, entitled. This was different. With a sense of weary dread, I heaved myself out of the chair and opened the door. It was Keisha. My granddaughter stood on the porch, bathed in the pale yellow light, and my heart constricted. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. She was clutching the straps of her backpack as if it were a life raft. She looked small and lost. All my own self-pity evaporated in an instant, replaced by a surge of grandfatherly concern. "Keisha, honey, what's wrong? What are you doing here so late?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, her lower lip trembling. Then she threw herself into my arms, her body shaking with silent sobs. I held her tight, stroking her hair the way I had done when she was a little girl who had fallen and scraped her knee. I led her inside and sat her down on the sofa, the one her mother had mentally reupholstered just days before. I made her a cup of hot tea, my hands moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in days. After a few minutes of choked silence, she finally spoke, her voice thick with tears. "I heard them, Grandpa," she whispered, staring into her mug. "I heard everything." "Heard what, sweetheart?" I asked gently, though I already knew. "Mom and Dad," she said, a wave of fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "They were in the study last night. They thought I was asleep. They were talking about you, about the house." She took a shuddering breath. "Dad was talking about liquidity and assets, and Mom was laughing, Grandpa. She was laughing about how easy it was going to be, how you were getting so forgetful you wouldn't even know what you were signing." The words came out in a torrent of shame and horror. She was ashamed of them. For them. She was feeling the loyalty and disgust that her own father should have felt. "They called this place a money pit. They said you were a burden. And they had these brochures, Grandpa, for those homes, those places where they send old people. They were picking one out like they were choosing a hotel for a vacation." I listened, my own heart breaking all over again. Not for myself this time, but for her. For the brutal way she had been forced to see the truth about her own parents. The cruelty I had experienced alone was now doubled, reflected in the eyes of this innocent girl who loved them. I had wanted to protect my family from this ugliness, but the poison had already seeped through the cracks, and it was wounding the only one who didn't deserve it. When she finished her confession, hanging in the air between us, she seemed to gather herself. The tears stopped. She straightened her back and looked at me with an expression of fierce adult determination that I had never seen on her face before. "They're wrong," she said, her voice low and steady. "They're wrong, and I'm not going to let them do this to you." She reached down and swung her worn canvas backpack onto her lap. She unzipped it with a decisive tug. She didn't pull out a textbook or a laptop. She pulled out a thick, rumpled manila envelope and pushed it across the coffee table towards me. I looked from the envelope to her face, a question in my eyes. "What's this, Keisha?" "It's for the house," she said simply. I opened the unsealed flap. My breath caught in my chest. It was full of cash, stacks of it held together with rubber bands, 20s, 50s, even a few $100 bills. It was a chaotic, beautiful pile of money. It looked like a life savings. "My God, Keisha," I whispered, stunned. "Where did you get this?" "It's my college fund," she said, her eyes boring into mine, daring me to argue. It's everything. From every birthday, every Christmas since I was born, from my part-time job at the coffee shop for the last 3 years. I've been saving it forever. She took another breath, her voice gaining strength. It's not enough, I know. It's not 15,000. I counted it 3 times. It's $5,062. But it's a start, Grandpa. It's a start. You can have it. All of it. I don't care about college right now. This house. This is more important than some stupid degree. This is our family. This is Grandma Vivian's home. The dam inside me finally broke. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt hot, genuine tears well up in my eyes and stream down my face. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking gratitude. This child, this beautiful, brave girl, was offering me her entire future, everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of. She was offering it without a moment's hesitation to save the home of a grandfather her own parents had already discarded. She saw my tears and her own eyes softened. I can work more, she said, her voice softening into a plea. I'll get a second job. I'll drop a couple of classes. We can figure it out, Grandpa. We can fight them. We won't let them do this to you. I won't let them. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Then I slowly, gently pushed the envelope back towards her. No, sweetheart, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was love and pride and a fierce protective instinct that roared to life inside me. You are not giving me your future. Your future is the most important thing in the world. I took her hands in mine. They were so small, yet they had just offered to carry the weight of the world for me. You listen to me, Keisha, I said, and my voice had a new strength, a new certainty that I hadn't felt in years. You put that money back in the bank. You are going to go to college. You are going to do amazing things. And you are not to worry about this house or your grandfather for one more second. Do you understand me? She looked confused, her hope starting to falter. But the money, the taxes, your grandfather has a plan, I said, looking her directly in the eyes. I didn't tell her about the $80 million. I didn't need to. She just needed to see the truth in my face. The truth that the weak, confused old man her parents thought they were dealing with was gone. Everything is going to be all right, I promise you. They are not going to take this house. A flicker of hope returned to her eyes. She saw the change in me. She saw that the fear was gone, replaced by something hard and unbreakable. I stood up and pulled her into a hug, and this time I was the one holding her up. I held my granddaughter, my true heir, the only one who had passed the test that had cost me a son and a daughter, but had given me the priceless gift of knowing who was truly worthy of my love. The darkness was gone, pierced by this single brilliant act of loyalty. I had my answer. I had my ally. And now I knew exactly what I was fighting for. I held my granddaughter in my arms, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the crushing weight on my chest lifted. Her small, strong frame was an anchor in the storm that had been raging inside me. She was real. Her love was real. In a world that had suddenly become a landscape of lies and illusions, she was the one true thing. I could feel the frantic beating of her heart against my ribs, a heart full of a fierce and noble loyalty that her own father seemed to have forgotten how to feel. I breathed in the scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of coffee from her barista job, and it was the most comforting thing I had experienced in years. She was the best of us, the best of me and the best of Vivian, all wrapped up in this beautiful, brave young woman. I gently pulled back my hands on her shoulders and looked into her tear-streaked face. And in her eyes, I saw my wife. It was uncanny. It wasn't the color or the shape. It was the light behind them. A light of unwavering integrity, of fierce compassion, of a spirit that could not be bent or broken by the petty cruelties of the world. Vivian was here in this room looking back at me through the eyes of her granddaughter. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty what my wife would have wanted me to do. With a tenderness that was almost painful, I reached for her backpack, zipped it open, and placed the thick envelope of her future back inside. I zipped it closed with a decisive pull. No, sweetheart, I said, my voice thick but steady. Absolutely not. But Grandpa? She started, her face crumpling with confusion and fear. We have to do something. I don't care about the money. I do. I said, my voice firm but full of a love so powerful it felt like it could reshape the world. I care about it more than anything, not for what it can buy, but for what it represents. That money in there isn't just paper, Keisha. It's your hard work. It's your discipline. It's your dream. It's every birthday you saved, every long shift you worked. It is your beginning, and I will not be the one who takes your beginning away from you. Your grandmother would rise from her grave and haunt me for the rest of my days. I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. I was speaking a language, she knew the language of values that Vivian and I had tried to build our family on. We believed in two things, your grandmother and I. I continued my grip on her shoulders, gentle but firm. Hard work and education. We didn't have much of either, but we made sure your father and your aunt had the chance. That money you saved is the proof of those values. It is the real family legacy, Keisha. Not this house, not some inheritance. That spirit in you that is willing to sacrifice for the people you love, that is the legacy. And it is priceless. You will not spend it on a problem that is not of your making. She looked at me, her fear slowly being replaced by something else. Awe. She was seeing a different man than the one who had opened the door an hour ago. The defeated, heartbroken old man was gone. In his place stood someone she didn't recognize, someone with a spine of steel and a fire in his eyes. The weight of my children's betrayal had been immense, but the power of my granddaughter's love was infinitely greater. It had not just healed me, it had reforged me. The test is over, sweetheart, I said, and my voice had a new resonance, a new authority. And you are the only one who passed. The test, she asked, her brow furrowed. It doesn't matter now, I said, giving her a small, sad smile. What matters is that I have my answer. Your father, your mother, your aunt, they have all made their choices. They have shown me who they are. Now it is my turn to make mine. And I promise you this, Keisha Thorne, I am not the helpless old man they think I am. This house is not for sale. Not now, not ever. This is your grandmother's home, and as long as I am breathing, it will stand. The words were an oath, a sacred vow spoken into the quiet of the room. Keisha stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. The fear in her eyes was completely gone, replaced by a fierce and shining pride. She believed me. She didn't know how, but she knew with the certainty of a true heart that her grandfather was going to fix this. Now I need something from you, I said, my tone shifting from a declaration to a quiet conspiracy. This is our secret now, yours and mine. I need you to not say a word about this to your parents, not about the money you offered me, not about this conversation. I need you to go home and pretend that you know nothing. I need them to continue to believe that their plan is working. Can you do that for me? Can you be my silent partner in this? A slow smile spread across her face. It was the first genuine smile I had seen all night. She was no longer just a victim of her parents' cruelty. She was now my ally, a co-conspirator in the cause of justice. She nodded, her eyes bright with purpose. Yes, Grandpa, she whispered. I can do that. I won't say a word. Good girl, I said, my heart swelling with a pride so immense it almost hurt. Now I want you to go home. I want you to focus on your studies. I want you to work hard and build your future. And I want you to let me handle the past. Let me handle them. I walked her to the door. The air between us was no longer heavy with sorrow. It was electric with a shared secret strength. The house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a fortress, and Keisha and I were its sole defenders. I gave her one last hug, a hug between partners, between equals. I love you, Grandpa, she said, her voice full of a newfound confidence. I love you more, sweetheart, I replied. Now go on, and don't you worry about a thing. I watched her walk down the path and get into her small beat-up car, the car she had bought with her own money. She gave me one last wave, a smile on her face, before driving off into the night. I closed the door and stood in the hallway alone once more. But the loneliness was gone. The despair was gone. I was filled with a purpose so clear and so powerful it felt like a bolt of lightning had shot through me. I looked around the house, at the furniture, at the photographs, at the walls that had absorbed a lifetime of love. This wasn't just a house. It was a legacy. And I finally had an heir worthy of it. My fight was no longer about my own wounded pride. It was about protecting her future from their greed. I walked over to the old roll-top desk in the corner of the living room, the one my own father had given me. I switched on the small green lamp, casting a pool of determined light in the darkness. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. The time for sorrow was over. The time for testing was over. The time for reacting was over. The time for planning had just begun. The adjustment, as I had come to call it in my mind, was about to commence, and I would show them what a forgotten old man armed with the truth and a worthy cause was truly capable of. The morning after Keisha's visit, I woke before the sun. For the first time in weeks, the oppressive weight of sorrow was gone. In its place was a quiet, humming energy, a clarity of purpose that felt like a long-lost friend. The grief had been a fog clouding my judgment and sapping my strength. Keisha's love had been the wind that blew it all away, revealing a hard, clear landscape. I knew what I had to do. The time for testing was over. The time for action had arrived. I did not put on my usual worn jeans and flannel shirt. Instead, I walked to the back of my closet and pulled out the suit I had worn to my wife's funeral. A simple, dark gray suit, the best I had ever owned. It felt strange to put it on now, but it felt right. I was burying another part of my life today, the naive, forgiving father who had refused to see the truth. I was putting on armor. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the man looking back. The weary slump was gone from his shoulders. His eyes, which had been clouded with sadness, were now sharp and focused. He looked older, yes, but he also looked dangerous. I went to the old steel safe hidden in the floor of my closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. I spun the combination, the familiar clicks echoing in the quiet room. Inside, amongst Vivian's jewelry and our old marriage certificate, was the lottery ticket. It looked so ordinary, so flimsy. I took it, folded it once, and placed it in the inside pocket of my suit jacket. Then I walked out of my house and drove downtown. The city of Atlanta rose up around me, a forest of glass and steel that had always felt like my son's world, not mine. A world of ambition and power and money that I had never understood. But today I did not feel intimidated. I felt like a general arriving on a foreign battlefield, my mind clear, my strategy prepared. I was not here to be a victim of this world. I was here to conquer it. The law firm of Chen, Iwata, and Park was on the 42nd floor of one of the tallest buildings. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and hushed importance. A young woman at a desk that looked like a modern sculpture directed me to the elevators. Everything was designed to make a man like me feel small and out of place. But I wasn't a man like me anymore. David Chen's office was at the end of a long hallway. He stood up as I entered, a warm smile on his face. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with a sharp, intelligent face and kind eyes. He was not the stuffy, intimidating lawyer I had pictured. He was the son of my old friend Charlie Chen, a man I had worked beside for 30 years at the auto plant. "Mr. Thorne," he said, extending his hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you. My dad talked about you all the time." "He was a good man, your father," I said, shaking his firm hand. "One of the best." "He always said you were the most honest man he ever knew," David replied, and his words were not flattery. They were a statement of fact, a foundation of trust that was immediately established between us. He wasn't just my lawyer, he was Charlie Chen's son. He led me to a comfortable leather chair. His office wasn't what I expected. It was modern and clean, but there were pictures of his wife and 2 young daughters on his desk, and a clumsy, colorful painting clearly done by a child was framed on the wall. This was a good man. A family man. I knew I had made the right choice. My dad said if I was ever in real trouble, I began, my voice steady, the kind of trouble that felt too big to handle, I should call his son the lawyer. David leaned forward, his expression serious. "What kind of trouble are you in, Mr. Thorne?" And so I told him. I told him everything. I started with the lottery ticket, but I didn't show it to him yet. I started with the test. I told him about the phone calls to Jamal and Angela, recounting the conversations with a calm objectivity that surprised even myself. I told him about the visit, about the appraiser they called a consultant, about their cold dissection of my home and my life. I told him about the glossy brochures for Serenity Gardens and the deposit they had already put down on a room for me. I told him about Angela selling my tools on the internet. I laid out the facts of the case not as a heartbroken father, but as a client presenting evidence. Throughout my story, David listened with an intense, unwavering focus. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded occasionally, a deep line forming between his brows. His initial kind expression had been replaced by a look of grim professional anger. He was not just hearing a story, he was witnessing a betrayal. Then my voice softened. I told him about Keisha. I told him about her late-night visit, about the shame and horror in her eyes as she described what she had overheard. I told him about the worn envelope full of her entire future, the $5,062 she had offered me without a second's hesitation. As I spoke of her, the emotion I had been suppressing finally broke through. My voice grew thick with a father's, a grandfather's love and pride. She was the only one, David, I said, my voice cracking slightly. After all of it, she was the only one who passed the test. When I finished, the office was silent for a long moment. David stared at me, his face a mixture of disbelief and profound respect. He slowly shook his head. Mr. Thorne, I don't have words for what they've done. I do, I said, my voice hardening again. But words are no longer enough. The time for words is over. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the folded lottery ticket, and slid it across the polished surface of his desk. And this, I said, is the complication. David picked it up. He unfolded it carefully. He read the numbers. His eyes widened, but that was the only sign of his shock. He was a true professional. He turned to his computer, typed in a few things, and verified the winning numbers and the date of the drawing. He swiveled back in his chair and stared at the ticket for a full 30 seconds. Finally, he looked up at me, not with excitement or congratulations, but with the focused intensity of a master strategist who had just been handed a powerful new weapon. Well, Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice low and steady, this certainly changes the strategic landscape. That's why I'm here, I replied. I need a new strategy. I call it the adjustment. The adjustment, David repeated, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face for the first time. I like it. So tell me, what are the objectives of this adjustment? This was the moment. The moment the plan moved from a vague idea in my head to a concrete mission. The objectives are simple, I said, leaning forward. Objective 1, I want to protect this house. It is not for sale. It is the legacy of my wife, and it will be passed down to the person who deserves it. Objective 2, I want to protect my granddaughter. I want to ensure that her future is secure and that she is rewarded for her loyalty and her love. Objective 3, I want to teach my children a lesson. I don't want to ruin them. I don't want to destroy them. I want to disarm them. I want to remove the weapon they value above all else, money, and see what's left of them when it's gone. I want to see if they can learn to stand on their own 2 feet without using me as a stepping stone. David listened, nodding slowly, his mind clearly working, processing, formulating. Those are clear and worthy objectives, Mr. Thorne. Punitive, but also rehabilitative. I can work with that. To do this, we need to move the assets out of their reach immediately and legally. We need to create a fortress. Exactly, I said. A fortress. If your goal is to build a legacy and protect the winnings from their greed, David said, his eyes lighting up with an idea, the most powerful tool we have is a charitable foundation. We can move the bulk of the winnings into an irrevocable trust. It would be legally untouchable by them. We could name it after your wife, the Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation. The name hit me like a physical blow. The Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation. It was perfect. It was a shield and a sword, a way to honor her memory and protect her family from itself. Yes, I whispered. That's it. The foundation can have any mission you want. David continued, his energy growing. Education, community support, affordable housing. Affordable housing. I repeated, an idea sparking in my mind. Jamal and Tiffany, they live in one of those new developments. Big houses, but I know for a fact they're mortgaged up to their eyeballs. Their status is built on a mountain of debt. David's smile widened. He understood immediately. That gives us leverage, Mr. Thorne, significant leverage. A foundation with $50 million in assets could, for example, start a community revitalization project. It could hypothetically begin acquiring property in a certain over-leveraged suburban neighborhood. The plan was taking shape, more brilliant and more devastating than I could have imagined. We weren't just going to build a fortress. We were going to lay siege. And finally, David said, his tone becoming serious again, your will. We need to rewrite it immediately. We'll set up a small, tightly controlled trust for Jamal and Angela, an allowance contingent on certain conditions, holding down a job, 2 years Financial literacy classes, something to force them to learn the lessons you tried to teach them. And Keisha, I asked. Keisha, David said, his voice full of respect. We make her the ultimate beneficiary, the heir to your personal assets and the future head of the Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation once she's of age and has completed her education. We protect the legacy, and we put it in the hands of the one person who has proven she understands its true value. I sat back in my chair, a sense of profound and powerful peace washing over me. It was all there. The plan was perfect. It was just. It was surgical. It was an act of terrible necessary love. David picked up his phone. I'm going to start making some calls. We need to move quickly and quietly. By the time they come back to you with their paperwork, I want our fortress to be built and our cannons to be in position. I nodded, feeling a sense of control for the first time in months. I had an ally. I had a plan. The worried, heartbroken old man who had walked into this building an hour ago was gone forever. I was no longer a victim waiting for the inevitable. I was a commander, a strategist, a king who was about to reclaim his kingdom. The adjustment had begun. The days that followed my meeting with David Chen were a blur of focused activity, a whirlwind of legal and financial maneuvers that felt as complex and precise as rebuilding a classic engine. I spent more time in his 42nd floor office than I did in my own home. That world of glass and steel, which had once felt so alien and intimidating, began to feel like my own. It was a war room, and I was no longer a visitor. I was its commander. David had assembled a small, elite team. There was Ms. Albright, a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes, and a mind that moved like lightning through the dense jungle of tax law and estate planning. And there was a young man named Ben, who handled the financial logistics, a quiet wizard who could make millions of dollars appear in one account and disappear from another with a few keystrokes. They treated me not as a confused old man who had stumbled into a fortune, but as the chairman of a new and powerful enterprise. They called me Mr. Thorne, and their respect was a balm on the wounds my own family had inflicted. The first step was the most surreal, claiming the prize. David handled it with the discretion of a secret agent. There was no press conference, no giant check, no cameras flashing in my face. We went to a quiet, official-looking office downtown. I was ushered into a small room where a man in a gray suit verified the ticket, checked my identification, and had me sign a series of non-disclosure agreements. I held the pen, the same pen I had used to sign my mortgage papers and my children's birth certificates, and I signed my name. With that simple act, $80 million, a sum so vast it felt like a fiction, became my legal property. I felt no giddy rush of excitement. I felt only the immense crushing weight of responsibility. I was now the custodian of a power that could build or destroy. Back in David's office, the real work began, the construction of the fortress. David and Ms. Albright walked me through the creation of the irrevocable trust and the foundation. They explained it to me in simple terms, using analogies I could understand. Think of the trust as a vault, Mr. Thorne, David had said, sketching on a whiteboard. Once the winnings go in, they no longer belong to you personally. They are owned by the foundation, and the foundation is governed by a set of rules, a mission statement that you create. It's a legal entity with one purpose: to fulfill that mission. Your children cannot sue it for a share. Creditors cannot touch it. It is completely, totally, and permanently secure. Miss Albright elaborated. The foundation will be a tax-exempt entity. It means the money can grow and be used for its intended purpose, without the government taking a huge slice every year. It's the most powerful tool for wealth preservation and legacy building that exists. They asked me to define the mission. They wanted to know what the Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation would stand for. This was the most important part. This was where I would pour the contents of my heart into the cold legal language of a corporate charter. I didn't need to think about it. I had been thinking about it my whole life. My wife Vivian, I began, my voice quiet but clear. She believed in roots. She always said a family needs a safe, decent place to put down roots, a place they can afford to call home without working 3 jobs and breaking their backs. So the first mission is affordable housing, helping working families buy their first home. David and Ms. Albright exchanged a look, and I saw a flicker of genuine admiration in their eyes. She also believed in education. I continued thinking of Keisha. Vivian never had the chance to finish school. She had to work to support her family. It was her one big regret. She would want us to help kids who have the brains and the drive but not the money. Scholarships for trade schools, for community colleges, for university, for kids who are willing to work hard for their future. And finally, I said, my voice growing thick with emotion, She believed in community. She loved her garden. She knew all our neighbors by name. She was the one who organized the block parties. The foundation needs to support the things that bring people together. Community gardens, public parks, libraries, places where people can connect and look out for one another. As I spoke, David's pen flew across a legal pad, translating the values of my wife's beautiful soul into the formal binding language of our mission statement. For hours, I sat at that long, polished conference table, a retired mechanic surrounded by brilliant legal minds building something that would outlast me, something that would carry the best part of my wife into the future. They brought in stacks of documents, and I read every single line. I, who had once struggled to understand the fine print on a warranty, was now deciphering the intricate clauses of trust agreements and corporate bylaws. And I understood it all because I knew the purpose behind it. Each signature was a brick in the wall of my fortress. Each clause was a cannon mounted on its ramparts. We took breaks for lunch, eating simple sandwiches and drinking coffee from paper cups right there at the conference table. During those moments, David and I would talk about his father, Charlie. We'd share stories from the old days at the plant, laughing about the time Charlie tried to fix the foreman's car and accidentally turned on the sprinklers, soaking the entire executive parking lot. In those moments, he wasn't my high-powered lawyer, and I wasn't his wealthy client. We were just two men connected by the memory of a good and honest friend. And it made the foundation of trust between us even stronger. By the end of the week, the work was done. The lottery winnings had been anonymously claimed and transferred. The bulk of the fortune, over $50 million after taxes, was now sheltered in the ironclad vault of the Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation. The fortress was built. David called me into his office one last time. He presented me with a heavy, beautifully bound portfolio in dark blue leather. On the cover, embossed in elegant gold letters, were the words, "The Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation." "Congratulations, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice full of a quiet, genuine respect. "It's official. The assets are secure. Your legacy is protected." I took the portfolio in my hands. It felt solid, real, permanent. I traced my wife's name with my finger. For so long, her memory had been a source of quiet sorrow, a beautiful thing that lived only in my heart. Now it was a force in the world, a force for good, a powerful entity that would build homes, educate children, and strengthen communities long after I was gone. I hadn't just protected my money from my children's greed. I had transformed it into an immortal monument to my wife's love. A profound sense of peace settled over me, deeper and more complete than any I had ever known. The weight of the $80 million was finally lifted, replaced by the strength of a sacred purpose. The days of hiding, of testing, of grieving were over. I was no longer a victim. I was the chairman and founder of a powerful institution. And now it was time to put that institution to work. The stage was set. The pieces were in place. The adjustment was about to enter its next decisive phase. The week following the creation of the Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation was the quietest of the entire affair, but it was a new kind of quiet. It was not the heavy, sorrowful silence of a man drowning in grief. It was the calm, patient silence of a hunter waiting in a blind. The house was no longer my prison. It was my headquarters. From here, I would watch the world, and I would wait. My phone rang several times a day. I never answered. I would let the calls go to my voicemail, and later in the evenings I would listen to the messages with a detached, analytical curiosity. The tone of my son and daughter-in-law shifted with each passing day. At first it was confident and condescending. "Hey Dad, it's Jamal. Just calling to see if you've had a chance to look over that paperwork. Give me a call so we can schedule a time to go to the bank." The next day it was laced with impatience. "Dad, it's Tiffany. We really need to get the ball rolling on this. The director at Serenity Gardens called, and they can't hold that lovely room for you indefinitely. Please call us back." By the end of the week, their voices were tight with a frustrated annoyance they could no longer conceal. "Dad, why aren't you answering your phone? We're trying to help you. This is a time-sensitive financial matter. You're putting your own future at risk by ignoring us." I would listen to their messages and feel a cold, grim satisfaction. For my entire life as a father, I had been reactive. I had responded to their needs, their dramas, their demands. Now, for the very first time, they were reacting to me, to my silence. And my silence was a weapon they had never encountered before and had no idea how to fight. I was no longer playing their game. I was forcing them to play mine. On Friday morning, David Chen called. His voice was crisp and full of energy. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne. I trust you're having a peaceful week." "It's been very illuminating, David," I replied, a hint of dry humor in my voice. "I imagine it has," he said with a knowing chuckle. "Well, I'm calling with a progress report. The engine has been built. Today we turn the key." He proceeded to update me on the creation of what he called our Special Acquisitions Vehicle. "It's a shell corporation, a limited liability company," he explained, "completely anonymous and legally firewalled from the foundation. As far as anyone in the world is concerned, it's just a new real estate investment firm with very, very deep pockets. We've called it the Oakmont Development Group. It sounds solid, respectable, and utterly boring." "Oakmont Development," I repeated. It did sound boring. It sounded like the kind of company my son Jamal would be desperate to impress. "I've also done a deep dive on the financials of your son's neighborhood, as you suggested," David continued. "It's exactly as you suspected. It's a classic suburban trap. Big, beautiful houses that look like symbols of success, but the public records tell a different story. 90% of them are mortgaged to the hilt, many with secondary loans. They're house rich and cash poor. They're living on the edge financially speaking, all trying to keep up appearances. It's a powder keg of quiet desperation, Mr. Thorne, and we are about to light a match." I felt a chill run down my spine, a mixture of awe and a terrible sense of power. I was seeing my raw emotional desire for justice being shaped into an elegant and devastatingly effective strategy. "So what's the first move?" I asked. "Here's where the art of the campaign comes in," David said, his voice alive with strategic excitement. "We will not be making an offer on your son's house. Not yet. That would be too obvious and it would raise suspicion. No, our first move is to set the bait. We have identified 3 other houses on their street. The owners fit the profile: high mortgage, 2 kids in private school, a new luxury SUV in the driveway. They are exactly the kind of people who are struggling to maintain their lifestyle." He paused for effect. "This morning, each of them will receive a letter via courier from the Oakmont Development Group. The letter will contain an all-cash offer to purchase their home for 17% above its current appraised market value. The offer is non-negotiable, and it expires in 72 hours. We will offer to cover all closing costs, and we can close the sale in less than 30 days. It is for all intents and purposes an offer that is too good to be true, an offer that no one in their financial situation could sanely refuse." I was speechless. The brilliance of it was breathtaking. "They'll take it," I finally said. "They will take it," David confirmed. "And then the second phase of the plan begins. The news will spread through that neighborhood like wildfire. A mysterious, wealthy developer is buying up houses for cash way over asking price. The gossip will start at the school gates, at the grocery store, over the back fences. It will create a wave of intense excitement and even more intense greed. People who were happy with their homes yesterday will suddenly see them as winning lottery tickets they need to cash in. By the time an offer from Oakmont Development lands on your son's doorstep, he won't be suspicious. He'll be terrified of being left out. He'll be desperate to get his share of the pie." I thought of Jamal and Tiffany, of their obsession with status, of their fear of being perceived as less successful than their neighbors. David's plan was not just a financial strategy. It was a psychological masterpiece. It was a trap perfectly designed to catch the very prey we were hunting. "The first round of letters went out this morning, Mr. Thorne," David said, his voice bringing me back to the present. "They should be delivered within the hour. The bait is in the water." "Thank you, David," I said, my voice full of a respect and gratitude that went beyond our business arrangement. "Thank you for everything." "It is my privilege, Mr. Thorne," he replied warmly. "My father would be very proud of what you're doing." After we hung up, I walked to the large window in my living room that looked out onto my own quiet, peaceful street. I watched as the mailman made his daily rounds, a simple, familiar sight, and I imagined another mail truck on another quiet suburban street 20 miles away. I imagined a man in a crisp uniform walking up a manicured stone pathway, a pathway leading to a house that was not my son's. And I imagined him delivering a single elegant cream-colored envelope bearing the logo of the Oakmont Development Group. It was just a piece of paper, a simple letter. But I knew what it really was. It was the first shot fired in a war my children didn't even know had begun. The trap was set. The first move had been made, and now all I had to do was wait. The weeks that followed were an exercise in a kind of patience I had never known I possessed. It was the patience of a chess master who has set a complex trap and now simply watches his opponent's pieces move one by one into their designated squares. I went about my days with a quiet, calm deliberation. I worked in my small garden. I read books from the library. I listened to old jazz records. To any outside observer, I was just a retiree living out his quiet, solitary life. But on the inside, I was a general overseeing a vast and silent military campaign. David Chen and I spoke every other day. He was my field commander giving me reports from the front line. As he had predicted, the first 2 offers from the Oakmont Development Group were accepted almost immediately. The for sale signs went up on the manicured lawns of my son's street, followed quickly by bold red banners that read, "Sale pending." David described the effect with a clinical satisfaction. The neighborhood was buzzing. Rumors were flying. A mysterious investment firm with seemingly bottomless pockets was buying up the block. The residents were in a state of frenzied excitement, a gold rush fever that had them all staring at their mailboxes, praying for their own golden ticket to arrive. During this time, my phone continued to ring. Jamal and Tiffany. Their messages, which I still saved and listened to each evening, were a fascinating study in escalating frustration. They were like spoiled children who couldn't understand why a toy they had demanded had not yet appeared. "Dad, we need to talk." "Dad, this is getting ridiculous." "Dad, if you don't call us back, we're just going to have to come over there and settle this." I listened to their threats and their ultimatums, and I smiled. They thought they were the ones in control. They had no idea that they were merely puppets, their strings being pulled by a force they couldn't see. They were so busy planning their own small petty conquest that they failed to notice the great army massing on their borders. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the call I had been waiting for finally came. It was Jamal. I let it ring 4 times before answering, taking a moment to slip back into character. I had to be the weak, confused, and slightly intimidated old man they expected me to be. "Hello?" I said, my voice sounding frail and tired. "Dad?" Jamal's voice was not annoyed or demanding. It was a high-pitched, almost manic explosion of pure excitement. He sounded like a man who had just won the lottery. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. "Dad, you are not going to believe what is happening. It's incredible. It's a miracle." "Jamal, slow down, son," I said, playing my part. "What's all the excitement about?" "The developer, Dad, Oakmont Development. The mystery firm that's been buying up the whole neighborhood. They sent us a letter. They want to buy our house." He was talking so fast he was practically shouting. In the background, I could hear Tiffany's voice, equally high-pitched and excited. "Tell him the offer, Jamal. Tell him the incredible offer. They're offering us 20% over market value. Dad, all cash. Can you believe it? The Martinsons next door only got 15%. We're the highest offer on the street so far. They must see the value in our upgrades," Tiffany squealed in the background, her voice dripping with triumphant pride. "Our new kitchen, I told you that new kitchen was a smart investment." I listened as they talked over each other, a chaotic duet of unrestrained greed. They were so lost in their own victory that they forgot they were talking to me. I was just a sounding board for their celebration. They spoke of the windfall not as a stroke of luck, but as a validation of their own superior intelligence and taste. It was their reward, they believed, for being smarter and better than their neighbors. Their arrogance was a thing of terrible, breathtaking beauty. "We'll finally be able to get out of this neighborhood." Jamal said, his voice full of a lofty disdain for the place he had been so proud to live in just a month before. "We can move to Buckhead, get a real house, a place with some prestige." "A pool!" Tiffany shouted from the background. "And a 3-car garage. We're finally getting out of the middle class, Jamal. We're finally going to be rich." Then Jamal seemed to remember I was on the line. He cleared his throat, trying to regain a semblance of businesslike composure. "And Dad," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of magnanimous generosity, "this is the best part. This solves everything. For everyone. Once we cash this enormous check, we'll have more than enough capital to handle your situation with ease. We can finalize the arrangements with Serenity Gardens and set up a long-term care fund for you without even touching the initial proceeds from your own house's sale. This takes all the pressure off. It's the perfect solution." I closed my eyes. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost elegant. He was celebrating a massive fortune, a fortune he intended to use to elevate his own status, and in the same breath he was talking about finalizing my admission into an old age home. He was using my fabricated crisis as a noble justification for his own rapacious greed. He wasn't thinking of helping me. He was thinking of how my situation made his own good fortune seem like a responsible and necessary act. It was a moral sleight of hand, and he was performing it without a trace of shame. So you see, Dad, he continued, his voice full of an urgent, pressing energy. Everything is working out perfectly. The universe is finally rewarding us for all our hard work. But we need to act fast. Our offer from Oakmont expires in 72 hours. And, well, this is the tricky part. For our own bridge loan for the new house, the bank wants to see that we have all our other financial affairs in order, which means we need to have a signed purchase agreement for your house. It's just a formality, a piece of paper, but it's all connected. We can't accept this incredible offer until you sign the papers for us to sell your place. It was a lie, of course. A clumsy, transparent lie. But he said it with such conviction, convinced of his own cleverness, convinced of my ignorance. In the background, Tiffany's voice cut through, sharp and insistent. Tell him we need him to be a team player, Jamal. This is for the good of the entire family. His signature is the key that unlocks all of this for us. The good of the entire family. The family they were systematically dismantling. The family whose foundation they were trying to sell out from under me. I took a deep breath, summoning the last performance I would ever have to give them. I let a long, weary sigh travel through the phone line. Oh, I said, my voice a quavering whisper. That's a lot to take in, son. It all sounds so fast, I don't know what to think. There's nothing to think about, Dad, Jamal said, his voice sharp with a final burst of impatience. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We can't let it slip away because you're feeling hesitant. It's simple. All you have to do is sign. I paused for a long moment, letting him hang in the silence. Then I gave him what he wanted. Well, if you're sure it's the right thing to do, I said, my voice full of a reluctant manufactured defeat. Then I suppose it is. You know best about these things. The explosion of relief on the other end of the line was almost palpable. Yes, Jamal hissed to Tiffany. He's in. Then back to me, his voice dripping with false patience. Excellent, Dad. You're making the smart choice, the logical choice. We'll have our lawyer draft the papers, and we'll bring them over tomorrow night. We'll celebrate, the whole family. Okay, son, I said quietly. Tomorrow night. I hung up the phone. I stood there for a moment, the silence of my house pressing in on me. I looked at the picture of Vivian on the mantelpiece. Her smile seemed to hold a secret, a shared understanding. The fisherman's line, which had been twitching for weeks, had suddenly gone taut. The fish had not just taken the bait, it had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. They were swimming confidently, triumphantly into the net. They thought tomorrow night would be their celebration. They had no idea it was going to be their execution. The trap was about to spring. The call came on a Wednesday evening. It was Jamal. His voice, which had been so manic and excited just a few weeks ago, had now settled into the smooth, confident tone of a CEO about to announce a successful merger. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by an unshakable, patronizing self-assurance. He had won, and he knew it. Dad, he began, the word a mere formality. Good news, we're all set. Our lawyer has drawn up the final paperwork. It's all very straightforward. We're having a family meeting at our house tonight to go over it all. 7 o'clock. Angela will be there too. We thought it would be nice to have a little celebration to toast to the family's new future. A celebration. He wanted to celebrate the signing of my life's death warrant. The audacity of it was almost poetic. Okay, son, I said, my voice a quiet, weary whisper. I'll be there. Excellent, he said briskly. Don't be late. This is a big night for us. For us, not for you. I put on my suit again. The gray wool felt less like armor now and more like a judge's robe. I was not going there as a participant. I was going as an observer, a final witness to their moral collapse before passing sentence. As I drove through the twilight towards their neighborhood, I felt a profound and unsettling calm. I should have been nervous. I should have been angry. But all I felt was a cold, quiet pity. They were like children playing with matches in a house filled with gasoline, and they were so proud of the pretty little flames they were making. Their house was lit up, every light blazing as if to announce its own magnificence to the neighborhood. It was a perfect symbol of their lives, bright, expensive, and completely hollow. Tiffany opened the door before I could even ring the bell. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress and a smile so wide and brilliant it looked painful. "Dad, you made it," she chirped, enveloping me in a hug that was all perfume and sharp angles. Come in, come. We're just about to open the champagne." The scene inside was one of carefully staged triumph. Jamal stood by the marble fireplace, a bottle of expensive champagne in his hand, the very picture of the lord of the manor. Angela was slouched on their enormous white sofa, scrolling through her phone, looking bored, but also vibrating with a greedy expectation. The air was thick with a false cheerfulness that was more suffocating than any silence. "Marcus," Jamal boomed, using my first name as if we were business partners. "Glad you could make it. Tonight we toast to the future, to the Thorne family's next chapter." He popped the cork with a loud bang that made Angela jump. He poured 4 glasses. Tiffany handed one to me. The golden liquid fizzed and bubbled. I took the glass a prop in their little play and held it. "What are we toasting to exactly?" I asked, my voice quiet. "To success," Jamal declared, raising his glass. "To smart decisions. And to Oakmont Development for making it all possible." "To Oakmont," Tiffany echoed, her eyes gleaming. They all drank. I raised the glass to my lips, but did not let the champagne touch them. I would not drink to my own execution. They made some strained small talk for a few minutes. Tiffany talked breathlessly about a house in Buckhead they had their eye on, one with a home theater and a wine cellar. Jamal pontificated about the stock market, dropping names of companies and investment strategies I was sure he barely understood. Angela complained that the champagne was too dry and asked if they had any vodka. They were all performing their roles in a play about wealth and success, and they were all terrible actors. Finally, the moment came. "Well," Jamal said, clapping his hands together with an air of finality. "Let's get down to business, shall we?" He led the way to their vast, dark wood dining table, a piece of furniture so large and imposing it looked like it belonged in a medieval castle. It was clearly a table for signing treaties, not for sharing meals. Tiffany placed 2 neat stacks of documents on the polished surface, along with a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen. "It's all very simple, Dad," she said, her voice shifting into a tone of gentle, patient instruction. "There are just 2 sets of papers, our sale agreement with Oakmont and the power of attorney agreement for the sale of your house." Jamal sat down opposite me, assuming the role of the lead negotiator. He tapped the first stack of papers. "Now this, Dad, is just a formality, as we discussed. It gives us the authority to act on your behalf in the sale of the property. It means you don't have to deal with any of the headaches, the lawyers, the real estate agents, any of it. We handle everything. It's the standard agreement." He pushed the document towards me. Tiffany leaned in her face, a mask of loving concern. "It's for your own good, Dad. We're taking the burden completely off your shoulders, so you can relax and start thinking about your new, stress-free life." I looked down at the paper. Power of attorney. The words were stark and brutal. They wanted me to sign over my rights, my home, my autonomy. They wanted me to legally declare myself incompetent and place my entire life in their untrustworthy hands. Angela, who had been silent up to this point, let out an impatient sigh. "Oh my God, can we just sign it already? I have plans to meet some friends later." Her contribution to the family's future was a desire to get it over with so she could get back to her own life. My eyes scanned the room as they continued to talk, their voices a meaningless drone. I looked at the cold, impersonal art on the walls. I looked at the perfect, unread books arranged on the shelves. I looked at the faces of my children, my son and daughter, and my son's wife. And I felt as if I was watching a documentary about a strange and predatory tribe whose customs I could no longer understand. I thought about the day I had taught a 5-year-old Jamal how to write his own name, his small hand wrapped around mine, carefully forming the letters. Now he was asking me to use that same signature to effectively end my own independence. I thought about the day I had co-signed the loan for Angela's first car, a car she had promised to be so careful with and had crashed within 6 months. Now she couldn't be bothered to feign interest for 5 minutes while they stripped me of my last significant possession. They had become caricatures of their worst impulses. Jamal, the pompous fraud, desperate to be seen as a financial titan. Tiffany, the ruthless social climber for whom family was just another asset to be leveraged. Angela, the perpetual child incapable of seeing the world beyond the edges of her own selfish desires. A profound cold pity washed over me. It was a deeper, more terrible feeling than anger. They were so utterly lost, so completely blinded by the glittering promise of money that they couldn't see the moral abyss they were so gleefully dancing beside. Jamal slid the fountain pen across the table. It came to a stop just before my hand. "Right here, Dad," he said, his voice soft and coaxing. He tapped a single empty line at the bottom of the page. "Just sign right here. One signature and all our problems will be solved." All our problems. I picked up the heavy pen. It felt cold in my hand. I looked up from the paper and met their eyes one by one. They were leaning forward, their faces a mixture of greed and anticipation. They were like wolves around a campfire waiting for the last embers to die out so they could move in for the kill. I gave them the performance they were waiting for, the performance of my life. I let out a long, shuddering sigh. I let my shoulders slump. I looked around the opulent room as if I were a condemned man taking one last look at the world. "My whole life," I said, my voice a broken whisper. "I worked so hard so that I would never have to ask anyone for anything, so that I could stand on my own 2 feet. I never thought it would end like this." The words were music to their ears. This was my surrender. This was the final, satisfying confirmation of their total victory. Tiffany's face softened into a look of triumphant pity. She even reached out and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's not an end, Dad," she said softly. "It's a new beginning, a managed, secure beginning. We're doing this because we love you." I looked down at the paper. I looked at the empty line where my name was supposed to go. I uncapped the pen. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the frantic, greedy beating of their 3 hearts. I could feel their eyes on me, burning with expectation. They were inches away from their prize, the culmination of all their plans. I touched the cold, sharp tip of the fountain pen to the paper. The drive to my son's house was the longest and shortest of my life. Every traffic light, every turn was a step closer to the final act of a play I had come to despise. Yet there was a strange sense of peace within me, the calm that settles over a battlefield just before the dawn of the final decisive battle. I had rehearsed my role. I was no longer the grieving father, the confused old man, or the angry victim. Tonight I was to be a ghost, a hollowed-out shell of a man defeated by the relentless logic of his own children's greed. It was the most difficult role I had ever been asked to play, but I knew I had to perform it perfectly. The success of the entire campaign depended on it. I had dressed for the part, not in my suit of armor, but in the clothes of a condemned man. An old, slightly frayed cardigan that had been Vivian's favorite, a pair of worn corduroy trousers. I had stooped. My shoulders slowed my walk and put a weary, vacant look in my eyes. When Tiffany opened the door, her bright, predatory smile faltered for just a moment as she took in my appearance. She saw exactly what she wanted to see, a man who had already given up. "Dad," she said, her voice a soft, purring symphony of false sympathy. "You came. We were so worried. Come in, sit down. Let us take care of you." She led me into their cavernous living room, her hand on my arm a little too tight, as if she were guiding a frail patient rather than her father-in-law. Jamal stood by the fireplace, the very picture of a man in charge. He had a folder of documents in his hand. Angela was already there, slumped on their white leather sofa, looking at her phone with an air of profound boredom. The air was thick with a cloying false concern. They had set the stage beautifully for my final surrender. "Dad, have a seat," Jamal said, gesturing to the hard, imposing dining room chair they had placed in the center of the room as if for an interrogation. "We have the papers here. Everything is in order. Our lawyer was very efficient." He said the word lawyer with a certain pride, as if the mere act of hiring one elevated him to a higher plane of existence. They didn't offer me a drink this time. The pretense of celebration was over. This was business. This was the closing. Tiffany and Jamal sat opposite me at the great dark table. Angela remained on the sofa, a sullen, disinterested observer, waiting for her share of the spoils. Jamal slid the documents across the polished wood. The top page was the power of attorney agreement. "Now, Dad," he began, his voice a carefully modulated blend of patronizing gentleness and corporate efficiency. "I know legal documents can be confusing, so I'll walk you through it. This first page is the most important. It simply gives Tiffany and me the authority to act as your agents in all financial matters related to the sale of your property. It's a standard agreement. It allows us to handle the negotiations, the closing, the transfer of funds, all of it. It takes the burden completely off your shoulders. We're doing this to protect you, Dad, Tiffany chimed in, her voice as smooth as silk, so you don't have to deal with the stress and the confusion of it all. We're here to make this transition as smooth and painless as possible for you. A transition, that's what they called it. The final stripping away of a man's independence. A transition. I looked at their faces, at the masks of loving concern they wore so expertly, and my mind was a cold, clear lens seeing everything. I saw the greed flickering in Jamal's eyes as he talked about the transfer of funds. I saw the cold calculation behind Tiffany's caring smile as she spoke of making things painless. And I saw the vacant, bottomless selfishness in Angela's bored expression as she glanced up from her phone, annoyed that this was taking so long. I thought of Keisha. I thought of her brave, loyal heart, and the thought of her was a shield protecting me from the poison of their words. I was not here for myself. I was here for her. I was the king playing the part of the pawn to protect the future of the true queen. It just feels... I started letting my voice tremble. It feels so final. This was the cue they had been waiting for, the sign of my weakening resolve. It's not final, Dad, Jamal said, leaning forward earnestly. It's the future. It's security. The Henderson appraisal proves the house is a major asset. The offer from Oakmont proves the market is peaking. Every piece of data tells us that this is the only logical path forward. We can't let emotion get in the way of a smart financial decision. I picked up the heavy fountain pen they had placed so strategically beside the documents. My hand, to my own surprise, was perfectly steady. I had to consciously add a slight tremor to it to complete the performance. I looked down at the signature line, the small empty space that represented the end of my life as I had known it. Then I looked up, meeting their eager, expectant gazes. I worked my whole life. I whispered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. Every day for 50 years. I worked so I would never have to ask anyone for anything, so I could leave something for my children. I never thought it would end with me signing it all away in the end. My apparent heartbreak was the sweet nectar of their victory. They exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance over my bowed head. It was a look of pure, triumphant relief. The old man was broken. The deal was done. Tiffany placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like the hand of a jailer. "It's not an end, Dad," she said softly, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's a new beginning, a managed, secure beginning. We're doing this because we love you." I looked down at the paper. I looked at the pen in my hand. This was it, the final moment of their play. I took a deep, shuddering breath, a sound that was a perfect imitation of a man's dying hope. I uncapped the pen. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I could feel their collective gaze on my hand, a physical weight urging me on. I touched the cold, sharp tip of the fountain pen to the paper right on the edge of the signature line. And then the doorbell rang. The sound was not a gentle chime. It was a loud, sharp, authoritative buzz that sliced through the thick, self-congratulatory atmosphere of the room like a gunshot. It was a sound that did not belong, a sound that broke the spell. Jamal, Tiffany, and Angela all jumped, startled. Annoyance flashed across their faces. "Who in the world could that be?" Tiffany hissed, her mask of gentleness slipping for a fraction of a second. "I have no idea," Jamal said, his brow furrowed with irritation. "Probably a package delivery. I'll get rid of them." He stood up and strode impatiently towards the front door. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted the pen from the paper. I placed the cap back on the fountain pen with a soft, satisfying click. I set it down carefully beside the unsigned documents. And then, for the first time that evening, I leaned back in my chair. The performance was over. The cavalry had arrived. Jamal strode towards the front door, his irritation clear in the stiff set of his shoulders. He was an actor whose final triumphant monologue had been interrupted by a stagehand tripping over a cable. "I'll get rid of them," he muttered, not bothering to hide his annoyance. Tiffany watched him go, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Angela sighed dramatically and went back to her phone. They were all so certain that this was a minor inconvenience, a brief pause before the curtain fell on their successful little play. They had no idea that the play they had been performing was over and an entirely new one, one in which they were not the stars, was about to begin. I listened. I heard the front door open. I heard Jamal's sharp, impatient voice. "Yes. Can I help you?" His tone was that of a man swatting away a pesky insect. It was followed by another voice, a voice I knew well. It was calm, deep, and possessed an easy authority that made my son's voice sound like the yapping of a small dog. I couldn't make out the words, just the murmur of a brief, polite exchange. Then the quality of the silence from the hallway changed. Jamal's voice returned, but it was different. The sharp edge of irritation was gone, replaced by a note of confused deference. Yes, I heard him stammer. "Yes, he's here. Right this way. Please come in." A moment later, Jamal re-entered the dining room. The confident, triumphant man who had left the room 30 seconds earlier was gone. In his place was a flustered, uncertain boy. His face was a mask of confusion. He looked like a man who had opened his front door expecting a package delivery and had found a lion waiting on his doorstep. Following him was David Chen. David moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that commanded the entire room. He was wearing a perfectly tailored dark charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple silk tie. He carried a slim, elegant leather briefcase in one hand. He was the very picture of wealth, power, and unshakable competence. He was everything my son had always pretended to be, and the difference was staggering. The air in the room seemed to crackle and shift around him, the balance of power tilting on an invisible axis. Tiffany and Angela stared at him, their mouths slightly agape. I could see the frantic calculations happening behind Tiffany's eyes as she tried to place this man. Was he from Oakmont Development, a senior partner sent to finalize their deal? Was he a banker? Who was this stranger who had walked into her home with the casual authority of a king? David's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with a quick, analytical glance. He noted the champagne glasses, the documents on the table, the 3 stunned faces staring at him, and then his gaze fell on me. He ignored everyone else as if they were pieces of furniture. He walked directly to the dining table, his footsteps the only sound in the suddenly silent room. He stopped beside my chair and addressed me, his voice full of a deep and genuine respect that made my children's patronizing words sound like the insults they truly were. "Mr. Thorne," David said, his voice calm and clear. "I apologize for my tardiness. The traffic coming out of the city was worse than anticipated. Are we ready to begin?" The words dropped into the silence of the room like stones into a still pond. Are we ready to begin? Not are you ready to sign? The implication was immediate, seismic, and utterly devastating to the narrative they had constructed. Jamal and Tiffany exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Jamal was the first to find his voice, though it was a few octaves higher than usual. "I'm sorry, who are you, Dad? Do you know this man?" I did not answer him. I did not even look at him. I simply looked up at David Chen, the son of my old friend, my trusted ally, and I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. That was all the signal he needed. David turned his attention to my son and daughter-in-law for the very first time. His expression was not angry or aggressive. It was something far worse. It was a look of cold, dispassionate assessment, the look a scientist gives to a specimen under a microscope. "My name is David Chen," he said, his voice level and precise. "I am Mr. Thorne's legal counsel." He placed his leather briefcase on the table. It made a soft, definitive click, a sound that seemed to echo through the room like a gavel falling like the locking of a vault. Legal counsel. The words hung in the air, electric and menacing. Tiffany's practiced smile did not just falter, it shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pallid mask of dawning horror. Her mind, which I knew could move so quickly, was clearly struggling to process this new, impossible data. An old, defeated man on the verge of signing his life away did not have legal counsel who looked like David Chen. Jamal stared, his face a comical picture of disbelief and suspicion. "Legal counsel," he sputtered, looking from David back to me. "What is this, Dad? What have you done?" Angela, for the first time all evening, finally put down her phone. She looked from David's expensive suit to my calm face, her brow furrowed. The simple transaction she had been waiting for, the one that was supposed to fund her next few months of leisure, had just become infinitely, terrifyingly more complicated. I remained silent. I looked at the faces of my children, at the panic and confusion that had replaced their arrogant certainty. The power in the room had not just shifted, It had reversed itself like a river suddenly flowing uphill. The play they had written was over. The stage had been cleared. Their celebration had come to an abrupt and brutal end. The real meeting, the one I had been planning all along, was finally about to begin. The silence in the room after David Chen's introduction was a physical thing. It was heavy, brittle, and charged with a panicked confusion. Jamal, Tiffany, and Angela stared at David, then at me, then back at David, their minds visibly struggling to reboot, to process the new data that had just crashed their entire operating system. The confident, predatory certainty of a moment ago had vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed, defensive bewilderment. Jamal, ever the one to believe in his own authority, was the first to recover. He puffed out his chest, a desperate attempt to regain control of a room that was no longer his. "Legal counsel," he said, forcing a dismissive laugh that sounded more like a choke. "What on earth for Dad? What is this nonsense? We're family. We don't need lawyers to sort out our affairs. This is a private matter." Tiffany, ever the manipulator, tried a different tactic. She turned a brilliant, if somewhat strained smile on David. "Mr. Chen, I'm sure there's been some sort of misunderstanding," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that was now curdling at the edges. "My father-in-law has been under a great deal of stress lately. He's a little overwhelmed. We're simply trying to handle some routine family estate planning for him." David did not smile back. He did not engage with their attempts to dismiss him. He simply stood there, a pillar of calm, formidable power, and let their frantic words dissipate into the tense silence. He opened his briefcase with a soft, authoritative click, but he didn't look at it yet. His attention was on me. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice respectful and clear, ignoring the others completely. "With your permission, I would like to take a moment to clarify the current situation for your family." I met his gaze and gave him a single, slow nod. The gesture was small, but its meaning was monumental. I was a king giving my general the order to attack. David turned his cool, analytical gaze upon Jamal and Tiffany. It was the first time he had truly looked at them, and he did so with the detached curiosity of a biologist examining a particularly unpleasant species of insect. "Let's begin with the documents you have so kindly prepared," he said, his voice as sharp and clean as cut glass. He gestured towards the papers on the table. "This power of attorney agreement and the associated sales contract for my client's home are null and void. Mr. Thorne has absolutely no intention of signing them. In fact, let me be perfectly clear, his house is not for sale." The first shockwave hit them. "Not for sale." Jamal sputtered, his face flushing with anger. "That's ridiculous. He has to sell. He has a $15,000 tax bill he can't pay. He'll lose the house anyway. He needs the money." A small cold smile touched the corner of David Chen's lips. It was a terrifying sight. "That brings me to my next point," he said smoothly. "The entire premise of this meeting, the very foundation of your plan, is based on a fraudulent assertion. The idea that Mr. Thorne is in any kind of financial distress is, to put it plainly, a lie. A fabrication he created for the sole purpose of testing the character of his children." He let that sink in. Test. The word hung in the air, ugly and accusatory. Tiffany's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. David ignored her, his eyes locked on Jamal. "Far from being broke," he continued, his voice dropping slightly for dramatic effect, "Mr. Thorne recently came into a significant life-altering fortune. To be precise, his personal net worth is currently in excess of $50 million. The second shockwave was a nuclear detonation. It shattered the remaining composure in the room. Angela literally dropped her phone, which clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. Jamal's jaw dropped, his face a comical mask of slack-jawed disbelief. $50 million, he stammered, the words catching in his throat. That's impossible. Where? How?" But Tiffany's mind, I had to give her credit, moved faster than the rest. The shock on her face was instantly replaced by a look of blinding, radiant greed. The prize wasn't a $500,000 house. It was a $50 million empire. Her entire demeanor changed. She looked at me, a hungry, possessive light in her eyes. $50 million, she breathed, her voice trembling with avarice. "Dad, why didn't you tell us? Oh my God, this changes everything. We can invest, that we can set up a family trust. We can—" "You will do nothing." David's voice cut through her excited fantasy like a shard of ice. His tone was no longer calm. It was whiplash sharp, and it made her flinch as if she had been physically struck. You seem to be under the profoundly mistaken impression that this money is yours to manage or that you will have any access to it whatsoever. You will not. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the heavy leather-bound portfolio. He placed it on the table with a soft, heavy thud that sounded like a coffin lid closing. Mr. Thorne has no intention of sharing this fortune with the children who tried to betray him, David stated, his voice ringing with cold finality. Instead, he has taken meticulous legal steps to protect it from your greed permanently. He slid the portfolio across the table. They all stared at the elegant gold lettering on the cover. Effective as of last week, David announced, Mr. Thorne has endowed the entirety of his assets to a new irrevocable charitable organization. I would like to introduce you to the Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation. He let them read the name. He let them see the name of the woman whose memory they had so thoroughly disrespected, now emblazoned on the institution that held the fortune they so desperately craved. The foundation, David explained, his voice returning to a clinical calm, has a stated mission of supporting affordable housing initiatives and educational scholarships throughout the state of Georgia. As the sole founder, Mr. Thorne serves as the chairman of the board. The assets, all $50+ million, are legally and irrevocably owned by the foundation itself. They are, to put it in terms you might understand, completely and forever out of your reach. The hope in their eyes died. It was a visible thing, a light being extinguished, leaving behind only a dark, horrified emptiness. The $50 million prize had appeared and vanished in the space of 60 seconds. But Jamal, his mind scrambling, latched onto the one last piece of wreckage he could find. The house, he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. Our house. The Oakmont offer. We can still sell our house. We'll still be rich. He looked at Tiffany, a desperate plea for reassurance in his eyes. David Chen actually smiled at that. It was a genuine, if chilling, smile. Ah, yes, he said, his voice laced with a deep and terrible irony. The Oakmont Development Group, a very aggressive new firm, aren't they? With very, very deep pockets. We've been quite impressed with their acquisition strategy. He paused, savoring the moment, letting them hang on the precipice. So impressed, in fact, that we created them. The final vestiges of comprehension drained from their faces, leaving only a blank, uncomprehending void. What are you talking about? Tiffany whispered, her voice barely audible. David leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if letting them in on a delightful secret. The Oakmont Development Group is a wholly owned subsidiary, a shell corporation created by and for the Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation. The foundation's first major community revitalization project is, in fact, this very neighborhood. He gestured vaguely towards the window. Your father, in his capacity as chairman of the board, felt that this area was ripe for redevelopment. He has authorized the acquisition of several key properties to be demolished and replaced with a new mixed-income community complete with a public park and a community center. He looked directly at Jamal and Tiffany, his eyes glinting with a merciless intelligence. The extraordinarily generous offer you received for your home, the one you were so excited about, it came directly from your father. He is the mystery developer you've been celebrating all week. This was it. The final blow, the payoff, the great brutal and beautiful reversal. The thing they had seen as their salvation was in fact the instrument of their humiliation, and it was being wielded by the very man they had sought to victimize and discard. There was no sound, there was no protest, there was only a silence so profound it felt like the end of the world. I watched them as the full crushing weight of their defeat finally settled upon them. I saw Jamal, the financial genius, the master of the universe, simply deflate. His shoulders slumped, his face went slack, and he looked for the first time since he was a little boy, utterly and completely lost. I saw Tiffany, the master manipulator, the brilliant strategist, her face a frozen mask of pure, silent, incandescent rage. She was beaten and she knew it, and the knowledge was consuming her from the inside out. And I saw Angela, her head in her hands, finally understanding the sheer scale of the fortune she had been permanently cut off from, and she began to cry. Not tears of remorse, but the loud, ugly, gulping sobs of a spoiled child who has just had her favorite toy taken away forever. Then, for the first time since David's arrival, I spoke. My voice was not triumphant. It was not angry. It was just quiet and sad and full of a terrible finality. I looked at the unsigned power of attorney agreement still sitting in the center of the table. You wanted a signature? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You were so certain you needed my signature to secure your future. I looked at Jamal and Tiffany. It seems you'll be the ones signing the papers after all. The offer on your house is still valid, I believe, for another 48 hours. I stood up from the table. The meeting was over. David, I said, I think we're done here. The silence that followed my final words was unlike any I had ever experienced. It was not empty. It was a dense, heavy vacuum sucking all the air and life out of the room. My children and my daughter-in-law were frozen 3 statues in a horrifying tableau of their own making. The arrogant certainty, the greedy excitement, the casual cruelty, it had all been incinerated in the blaze of David Chen's revelations, leaving behind only the shocked, hollowed-out shells of the people they thought they were. I stood there beside David, a silent observer at the funeral of their ambitions, and I watched as the full crushing weight of their utter defeat settled upon them. Jamal was the first to break. He did not rage or scream. The collapse was internal, a catastrophic failure of the entire structure of his identity. The man who had built his whole life on the illusion of being a financial genius, a master of the universe, simply crumbled. He sank back into the heavy dining room chair, not with the weariness of a tired man, but with the boneless collapse of a puppet whose strings have been cut. He stared blankly at the unsigned documents on the table, his eyes unseeing. No, he muttered the words, a soft, bewildered whisper to himself. No, that's not possible. The strategy was sound. The asset was undervalued. The data was clear. He was trying to diagnose his own ruin in the only language he knew, the cold jargon of business, but the words were meaningless now, the incantations of a failed magician. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a lost childish confusion that was almost pitiful. But why, Dad? He asked, his voice thin and reedy. Why would you do all of this? Tiffany's reaction was the polar opposite. There was no crumbling in her, only a volcanic eruption of pure, unadulterated rage. The mask of the polite, supportive wife and caring daughter-in-law did not just slip. It was violently torn away, revealing the ugly, venomous face that had been hiding underneath all along. Her shock curdled into a furious energy. She shot to her feet, her chair screeching backwards against the polished floor. But her rage was not directed at me or at David. It was a laser beam of contempt aimed directly at her husband, the man whose weakness had led to her downfall. You idiot! She shrieked, her voice, a shrill, piercing sound that was ugly beyond measure. You absolute incompetent fool! You told me he was a simple old man. You told me he was losing his mind. You told me this was a sure thing, a simple transaction. She was pacing now, a caged animal, her fists clenched at her sides. You let him play you. From the very beginning, you let this old man play you for a fool, and you let him play me. With a final guttural scream of frustration, she grabbed the half-empty champagne bottle from the table and hurled it against the far wall. It exploded in a shower of glass and foam, a fitting end to their premature celebration. Their partnership, I saw with perfect clarity, was never one of love. It was a business merger, and in the face of bankruptcy, they had immediately turned on each other. And then there was Angela. Her breakdown was in its own way the most pathetic and the most revealing. Her loud, gulping sobs, which had begun after the foundation was revealed, now escalated into a full-blown hysterical wail. But her grief was not for the destruction of her family. It was not for the pain she had helped cause. It was a purely selfish anguish, the tantrum of a child who has been denied the ultimate prize. $50 million, she wailed, her words punctuated by hiccuping sobs. $50 million? Do you have any idea what I could have done with $50 million? My whole life, it could have been perfect. No more debts, no more auditions. I could have had everything I ever wanted. She buried her face in a silk cushion on the sofa, her shoulders shaking with the sheer, tragic injustice of it all. You've ruined everything, she screamed into the cushion. You've ruined my life. She had learned nothing. In the face of this monumental lesson in character and consequences, her only thought was for the shopping sprees she would now never have. David and I did not engage. We did not speak. There was nothing left to say. To argue with them would have been like trying to reason with a hurricane. Their ruin was a storm of their own making, and all we could do was stand back and watch it rage. David picked up his briefcase from the table. He gave me a slight nod. It was time to go. We turned our backs on the chaos, on the broken man muttering about his failed strategy, on the furious woman hissing curses at her husband, on the weeping child mourning a future she never deserved. We walked to the front door. I paused for a moment with my hand on the doorknob and looked back one last time at the wreckage. I saw my family, and I felt a great and terrible sadness, not for myself, but for them, for the broken, empty people they had become. Then I turned away. David and I stepped out into the cool, clean night air and closed the door quietly behind us. The click of the latch was a soft, final sound, the sound of a chapter ending, the sound of justice being served, and the sound of a new, quieter, and more honest future finally beginning. As David and I stood by the door ready to leave them to the ruins of their own making, David paused. He turned back, an expression of thoughtful recollection on his face, as if he had forgotten a minor detail on a long checklist. "Ah, there is one final piece of business, if you'll indulge me for just another moment," he said, his voice calm and professional, slicing cleanly through the chaotic sounds of their despair. Their heads jerked up. Jamal looked up from his stupor. Tiffany froze in the middle of a hissed curse at her husband, and Angela's wailing subsided into a series of ragged, hopeful hiccups, their eyes red-rimmed and desperate, fixed on David. In the wreckage of their defeat, they were searching for any piece of driftwood to cling to, any sliver of hope that this was all a terrible nightmare from which they might still awaken. David walked back to the great dark dining table, a lone bastion of order in the emotional storm. From his briefcase, he produced one last document, a crisp, formal-looking report bound in a simple blue cover. It was, "I knew the summary of my new last will and testament." "In light of recent events," David began, his voice devoid of any emotion, "Mr. Thorne has felt it necessary to revise his estate plan. He wanted me to share some of the pertinent details with you now so that there will be no future confusion or misunderstandings." He addressed Jamal and Angela directly, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Mr. Thorne has not disinherited you completely." The words hung in the air. A flicker of something, a desperate, pathetic hope ignited in their eyes. Perhaps this was all just a scare tactic. Perhaps after this brutal lesson, their loving father was about to show them mercy. David let them hang on to that hope for a moment before methodically and mercilessly extinguishing it. "He has established a testamentary trust in your names," he explained. "From this trust, upon his passing, you will each receive a monthly stipend. The amount is modest. It is enough to cover the rent on a small one-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, utilities, and a basic budget for groceries and transportation. It is not enough for luxuries. It is not enough for a lifestyle. It is enough to survive." He paused, letting the reality of that sink in. Their faces were already beginning to fall. "However," David continued, and the word "however" was as cold and hard as a block of granite. "This stipend is not an entitlement. It is not unconditional. It is contingent upon your meeting several strict requirements which will be verified on a monthly basis by an independent trust administrator." He looked at Jamal. "First, you must both secure and maintain full-time verifiable employment. A record of steady work and legitimate pay stubs will be required to receive each month's payment. If you are unemployed, the stipend will be suspended." He then looked at Angela. "Second, you must both enroll in and successfully complete a certified financial literacy and debt management course from an accredited institution. A certificate of completion will be required within the first 12 months. Failure to do so will result in the permanent termination of the trust." Finally, he looked back and forth between all three of them, his gaze finally settling on Tiffany. "Third, you are to have no unsolicited contact with Mr. Thorne or your niece Keisha Thorne. Any form of harassment, any frivolous legal action, or any attempt to pressure or manipulate them in any way will be considered a breach of the trust's terms and will result in the immediate and permanent forfeiture of all future payments." He stood back from the table, his presentation complete. "Mr. Thorne believes," he said, his voice a perfect dispassionate echo of my own intentions, "that the greatest inheritance he can give you is not a sum of money that you have proven you are unfit to manage. It is instead the opportunity to finally learn the lessons of responsibility, self-sufficiency, and basic human dignity that you have until now so profoundly failed to grasp." The flicker of hope in their eyes died, replaced by a look of stunned, indignant outrage. This wasn't mercy. This was the ultimate humiliation. It was a punishment so perfectly, so paternalistically designed to insult them, that it was far worse than being left with nothing at all. "You can't be serious," Tiffany scoffed, her voice a venomous whisper. That's insulting." "An allowance," Angela wailed, the reality of her situation finally dawning on her. "You want me to get a job?" Jamal just stared, his face a blank mask of defeat. The prospect of having to re-enter the workforce, not as a high-flying executive, but as an ordinary man needing a paycheck to survive, was a humiliation too great for him to even comprehend. David did not deign to respond to their outrage. Their feelings were irrelevant. The terms had been set. He placed a copy of the will's summary on the table, setting it down amidst the wreckage of their champagne glasses and their now useless legal documents. "These are the terms," he said, his voice final. "They are non-negotiable." He turned, gave me a slight nod, and we walked towards the door once more. We did not look back. We left them there no longer, just defeated, but condemned. Condemned to a life of forced responsibility. Stripped of their unearned wealth, they had been sent back to the very beginning with their father's final harsh lesson as their only guide. It was not the end they had planned, but it was the beginning they so desperately needed. A few days after the storm had passed, I asked Keisha to meet me for lunch. We didn't go anywhere fancy. We went to a small, quiet diner with worn vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone honey. I needed a place that felt real, a place grounded in the simple dignities of everyday life. I watched my granddaughter pick at her food, her brow furrowed with a mixture of worry and curiosity. She knew something monumental had happened, but she didn't know the details, only that her parents' world had been turned upside down. I reached across the table and took her hand. It felt small and strong in my own. "Keisha," I began, my voice quiet but clear. "I have secured our family's assets. I have put them to work doing good in the world in your grandmother's name. We've established a foundation to help people to build things." I told her about the mission of the Vivian Thorne Legacy Foundation, about the scholarships for hardworking students and the grants for families struggling to find a decent home. I saw her eyes light up with a pure, uncomplicated pride. But a foundation needs more than just money. I continued, my gaze steady and serious. It needs a heart. It needs a conscience. It needs a leader with integrity and strength and a compassionate spirit. It needs a person who understands that true wealth isn't about what you have, but about what you give. I squeezed her hand, my heart full. "It needs you, Keisha." She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. A small, nervous laugh escaped her lips. "Me?" she whispered. "Grandpa, I don't know the first thing about running a foundation. I'm just a 19-year-old kid who works at a coffee shop." "I know exactly who you are," I said, my voice full of a certainty that left no room for doubt. "You are the person who was willing to give away her entire future for someone she loved. That makes you more qualified than any CEO or financial wizard in the world. The rest is just details, things you can learn. This isn't a gift, sweetheart. It's not a handout. It's a responsibility. I will run the foundation for as long as I am able. Your job is to learn, to study, to grow into the remarkable woman I already know you are. And when the time is right, you will take my place. You will be the guardian of your grandmother's legacy." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of a profound, overwhelming humility. She saw that I wasn't just giving her a fortune. I was giving her my trust, my faith. I was telling her that she was the one, the true heir. And in that quiet, unremarkable diner, the real inheritance was finally passed to the only one who had ever truly deserved it. After David and I left them that night, there were no more angry phone calls, no more desperate voicemails. There was only a vast, echoing silence. In the days that followed, I sometimes found myself composing speeches in my head, the final words I would say to my children. I imagined a grand paternal lecture, a final summary of their moral failures, a thundering condemnation of their greed. But when David's office informed me that they had, without protest, signed the papers to sell their house to the Oakmont Group, I realized there was nothing left to say. The consequences were the only last words they would ever need or understand. My actions were my final statement. The new difficult reality I had constructed for them was my closing argument. I had not set out to destroy them. I had set out to disarm them, to take away the poison of unearned wealth that was corrupting their souls. Whether they would learn from it was up to them. My part in their education was over. The months that followed were a quiet unfolding of this new reality. The house on the perfect suburban street, the great monument to their ambition, was sold. The foundation, under David's expert guidance, now held the deed. Jamal and Tiffany moved into a modest rented apartment on the other side of town. The expensive German cars were repossessed. Tiffany stripped of her hosting capabilities, and her husband's veneer of success vanished from the high-flying social circle she had tried so hard to conquer. And Jamal, the financial prodigy, the man who spoke of assets and liquidity as if he had invented them, found that the world was not so eager to employ a man in his late 40s with an inflated ego and a sudden mysterious gap in his resume. Their punishment was not poverty, it was obscurity. It was the quiet, grinding humiliation of having to live a normal life, a life they had always believed was beneath them. Angela, too, faced her new beginning. After a storm of tears and a blizzard of angry text messages, the simple, brutal math of her situation became clear. To receive her monthly stipend, she had to get a job. She is a hostess now at a busy downtown restaurant. I am told she complains constantly. She finds the work demeaning, the hours exhausting. But for the first time in her adult life, the electricity bill is paid with money she earned. The rent is covered by her own labor. The lesson, I hope, is beginning to take root, however painfully, in the barren soil of her self-absorption. I have not seen them. The terms of the trust are clear, and the distance is a sad but necessary boundary. Sometimes late at night I feel a pang of sorrow for the children I raised, for the memory of the family we once were. But then I think of the family I still have. The sun is warm on my back. It's a perfect Saturday in spring, and I am in my garden, the one Vivian planted so many years ago. The air is sweet with the scent of her blooming roses. I am not alone. Keisha is here. She kneels beside me in the soft earth, her hands covered in dirt, a smudge on her cheek. She comes every weekend. We don't talk about the turmoil of the past. We don't talk about the foundation or the great weight of the responsibility that will one day be hers. We talk about her classes. We talk about a funny professor she has. We talk about the future, her future, and it is a future full of boundless, brilliant possibility. Today I am teaching her about the roses. I am showing her how to prune the dead wood to make way for new growth, a lesson I know she understands in more ways than one. She listens with an intense, quiet focus, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wants to learn. She wants to grow things. You have your grandmother's touch, I tell her, watching as she gently clears the weeds from around the base of an old, resilient bush. She looks up at me and smiles a smile so full of light and love it makes my old heart ache with a joyful sorrow. I hope so, Grandpa, she says. I have a lot to live up to. I look at this remarkable young woman, my granddaughter, my true heir, and I see that the legacy Vivian and I tried to build was not made of wood and nails or dollars and cents. It was made of character, of integrity, of a love so strong it could withstand the harshest tests. I set out on this journey to test my children, to find out what they were really made of. I had to learn a terrible truth about some of them. But in the process, I discovered the priceless, inexhaustible treasure of the one who was true. I did not just save a house. I saved the soul of my family. And that soul is here with me now in this garden, ready to bloom for generations to come. The lottery ticket had given me a fortune, but my granddaughter, with her one simple act of selfless love, had made me the richest man in the world. For years I believed a family was an unbreakable bond, but this journey taught me that a family is more like a garden. It needs constant tending, and sometimes the most loving act is to prune the branches that have become diseased, the ones that threaten to poison the roots. I had to make a terrible choice to risk sacrificing the children I had in order to save the legacy I wanted to build. True inheritance isn't found in a will, but in the character of those who carry your name forward. I learned that sometimes you must tear everything down to let the right things grow. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a difficult journey, but one I felt I had to take. What would you have done in my position? Do you believe I did the right thing? I would love to read your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Please let me know where in the world you're listening from. It brings me joy to see how far these stories can travel. If you enjoyed this, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like it. Your support truly means the world.